Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's 2019-20 Board Budget Work Session. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'll let Joe do the introduction.
Sure.
So I'd like to let everybody know that we're conducting this a little differently. It's a bit of an experiment this year. We're, because we're sort of early in the process, we have asked our administrators to actually talk to us rather than us talking at them. So, Joe, you can.
All right. So we'll get to the introductions in a moment. Let's just take a quick look at the agenda. For those of you who don't have one and need one, they're over here on the side table. This is a board work session. So just to remind everybody, this is the board's opportunity to spend an expanded amount of time on a particular subject, in this case, the development thus far of the 2019-20 budget. It's not a regular meeting, it's a work session, so there are some differences there. We are, as Laura mentioned, going to use a slightly different format this year by way of asking our administrators to talk to us a little bit about what their budget looks like, how they put their budget together, give us some insights into what's there, what's not there, maybe highlight for us a particular noteworthy decrease or increase, whatever that may be. And I think due to the different natures of the areas that our administrators supervise, the nature of their reports will be a little bit different, but that's okay, I think. We are not planning to, unless the board wants to spend the time, to do what we did at our last meeting a week and a half ago, which is go through the entire first draft budget. Suffice it to say that first draft budget and the associated documents are on the table for anybody who needs a copy. They've been posted on our website since the morning after the last budget meeting. It hasn't changed. Okay, so there are no changes there for us to talk to you about. We've already been through it with the board. Tom did that in a pretty detailed manner at the meeting on Tuesday. So we're not planning on retreading what you've already heard. And again, since this is the board's work session, I didn't think that was necessarily good use of your time this morning. And I think, as Laura and I discussed, we want to put more of the emphasis on what the administrators have to share with us about the composition of their piece of the budget as we gathered this morning, because we don't often get to pull them together in one place at one time to discuss any topic, much less budget development. So all of our administrators are here, I believe. I didn't take a head count. I didn't take attendance yet, but it'll be obvious when we get going. So just so everybody knows, and we are recording this, so if anybody's watching this at home after the fact, Brett King, our elementary principal. I'll just go from my right to my left. Brett King is here. Our elementary principal, Steve Jensen, our director of technology and communication. Kind of a little bit in back of Steve Jensen is Sheldon Teeter, our director of facilities. Next to Sheldon is John Chemnitzer. Next to John Chemnitzer is John is our middle school principal. Marvin Krebs, next to John, is our director of curriculum and instruction. Kind of a little bit behind Marvin is Mark Berg. We're not asking him to give a presentation, but he is here in case he may have anything to add to the discussion. Next to Mark is Ed Davenport, our high school principal. Next to Ed is Emily Davison, our director of special services. And next to Emily is Fern Locks. And again, we're not asking Fern to give a presentation, but both she and Mark can feel free to chime in at any point, or if there are specific questions that that the board wants to direct to them, you can, but, and they're both our assistant principals, Mark Berg being our middle school, high school assistant principal, and Fern being our elementary school assistant principal. So that's the introductions for this morning. What I thought we do to start is I've already done the introduction in terms of the budget development process. Maybe we'll get into that as we start to talk to our administrators. So maybe this would be a good time to have them talk to us. Then we'll turn over part of the program to Tom to talk about things like the tax levy cap calculation, revenue projections, and then we can have a more general discussion about the budget and hopefully wrap it up before 3 or 4 this afternoon. So, would any of you care to volunteer to talk to the board about your budget before I flip a coin? Okay, Brett, great. Why don't you come up so we get your comments on via that microphone onto the recording. Thank you.
No, it's not going to.
You're not going to hear it. It's just going to record.
It's just going to record.
So good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'll start. As far as budget development goes at the elementary school, probably very similar to how John and Ed specifically set up theirs. For me, it usually starts in my meeting. I meet with my grade level chairs once a month. We start in September. Usually the October or November meeting is when we start really discussing the budget for the following year. We kind of, primarily in my building, because it's an elementary school, it's kind of consumable heavy. So certainly that's a lot of what I talk to my staff about as far as, our phonetics program, foundations, for example, and Wordly Wise, and then kind of moving to our math program. And as you know, this year we've shifted over to the first year of Big Ideas Math. We spent about 2 years kind of looking at math programs to replace everyday math. And it turned out that it also feeds into the middle school. So this year, it's our first year opening that up to staff. So there was a big kind of, and Marvin Krebs in the curriculum office was able to help me with the initial cost of, when you get a new program, the initial cost always includes teacher materials, and obviously you don't have to accrue that for quite a while with most programs. So, not knowing the time frame and making sure that we gave ourselves enough time to look at a new math program. Ultimately, like I said, Marvin Krebs was able to help, so I didn't have the roughly $45,000 or $48,000 to get everything we needed to lay out for this year. So that's where some of that money came from last year's budget. That's why I wasn't. I had just tried to budget for consumables myself. For this year, you'll notice there's about a $12,000 increase in my textbook code, and that's basically to pay for the consumables. The difference there is a cost difference between everyday math and Big Ideas Math. And although we looked at the costs as we were kind of looking at programs, we didn't want that to be the end all and be all of our decision. We wanted to figure out how to make that fit for a program that really worked. And Big Ideas is moving forward this year. So without going line by line, primarily what I wind up doing, I just wanted to mention that because that was the big part of the increase in my budget this year. Going back to the development process, primarily, like I said, I sit with my grade level chairs. We start to discuss what consumables we need. Historically, my budget is textbook and supplies and materials heavy, primarily because of the consumables in the classroom. So that's also related to, I try to work with my individual teachers, some providers, like AIS, for example, and try to figure out a dollar amount that I can provide each teacher for just classroom materials that they need to start their year and then keep the year running. So roughly, just to give you kind of roughly, it's been anywhere from when I started, about $400 down to about $250, and somewhere in between, we kind of just develop that as we go. So that's a big part of the supplies and materials that you'll notice. Obviously, we have kept it pretty steady because we do a lot of enrichment before school primarily. So that is kind of a steady number that has always stayed the same, roughly about 20,000. So that consumables textbooks are really the bulk of my program, my development, budget development. So then primarily from there, we start to I talk to the grade level chairs also about, do you have any equipment needs coming up? Because that's one of the things that might be an add-on. When, in all honesty, when we cut years ago, equipment was something that we kind of shaved down a lot, because there's also some, you know, your hands are tied with some of the ways we're allowed to spend that money. So sometimes if we don't have any real equipment needs, it doesn't wind up going into my budget, but that's another piece we discussed. So that's been something we've kept really very low for several years. Then my grade level chairs go back to their grades. They have a conversation about what they need for their classrooms as far as consumables, the existing programs that we have. And then they kind of present to me, each individual grade level chair, what their grade might need, and then we kind of just move through that process. The other addition this year are really, they're both kind of programmatic, so any real increase that I had this year, for the most part, came from, like I mentioned, the math, and then also the Great Body Shop, which we are piloting 3, 4, 5 this year. So there is a cost to that program as well. So those are basically the two main sources of the increase for my budget for this year. But like I said, we go through our grade level chairs, we kind of spend that time, you know, with the understanding that we put a kind of first draft of that budget in front of Tom before the holiday break. So that's usually the time frame that we utilize to develop the budget.
Does anybody have any questions?
Jacqueline?
How much of the increase that is due to the new programs with, excuse me, is going to likely continue on a yearly basis as opposed to being the startup initial costs?
Well, this is probably, it's roughly, I mean, just kind of throwing a number out, roughly the consumables for big ideas for the entire building K-5 from year to year is roughly 13 to 14,000, as opposed to about the 40-something that we needed to start the whole program. So that would just be, unless standards drastically change, unless the program, and one of the good things about this program was the fact that if there were kind of things missing, they had a useful digital interface that was going to upload lessons so that it's not, I mean, for me, being the administrator in the room, we were developing a proposal for a new program. The three major things I was looking for as an administrator, and many people around the table were differentiation techniques built into each lesson and each unit, a real movement in number sense K1 and 2, which we thought was lacking really in cyclical type programs, and then the fourth being that as an administrator and knowing that costs are a part of one of the things I obviously have to do as principal of my building, that I didn't need to kind of reinvest in teacher materials every 2 or 3 years anytime there was something that came down the pike, which you're seeing a lot of programs do now anyway. But so along those lines, this is about the increase that I will have on a pretty regular basis moving forward year to year. It is a little more expensive than everyday math, you know, and we'll have to kind of look at if things need to pull back in order to continue that program. We'll have to do that, you know, moving forward. But that's probably about the normal 13 to 14 each year, year to year to keep the program going. And then Great Body Shop is another anywhere 3 to 5, depending on what grade we're going to be working with. Right now, it's 3, 4, and 5, so it's about half the building because the other half's getting second step.
Right. And is that fairly consistent, given our projections of student population? You know, depending on how much do consumable costs depend on student numbers?
They do. You know, certainly if you think about it compounded across the building, it's a small amount per grade. And now, as we're adopting it, if you remember, we have 6 grades in my building, 4 of which are already down to 3 sections. A fifth of them will be next year. And then after that, it'll be pretty steady. So I'm thinking that's probably going to be about where we're going to need to be. If we had adopted this 5 years ago, then there probably would be a significant difference as we go through. But kind of the lower enrollment and the kind of one class per grade over the next 2 years shouldn't impact that cost very, very much.
Anyone else? Diane?
I have 2 questions for you. So with the consumables, which totally makes sense at the elementary school, I'm just wondering how technology is that made less consumables? Do you see that? less, or how do you see that changing?
I mean, I think it kind of offsets evenly, because it's interesting. One thing I didn't bring up with the question that you just asked was, what has increased is the digital memberships each year. So but we still have, obviously, like each student, even as for example, I've been doing a lot of formal observations, Fern, as well this year, primarily focusing on the new math program to just kind of be up to date with the staff and start to see patterns, and obviously that'll help dictate the PD in the future. We're kind of I apologize, I forgot to mention it.
Do you see technology changing?
Right. So, primarily what we're seeing is they still need, obviously, hands-on workbooks and journals that they utilize. But what we are seeing, it's interesting, is, these many new programs are doing, and certainly this one is as well. They're utilizing the technology to show them the actual work that they're working on now. So it's kind of a double thing. It's usually not one supplanting the other, it's a support. But what we have noticed increase over time has been, even with everyday math, was the digital membership. That is part of the kind of consumable redo each year. It's an annual basis,
Okay.
One of the things I did, and I've been talking to the reps already, when we adopted this last year, and we were looking at the initial cost for everything, like I mentioned, working with Marvin in his office, I also had asked that they give me a kind of first of all, a locked-in consumable cost for this coming year, and then I've been having conversations with her about the validity of that on a yearly basis, and they don't see a major increase in that. So I'm kind of working now to try to get the invoice for the following year and kind of get ahead, so I know an actual exact number going into November each year. So that's been kind of helpful. That's another good thing about this program, by the way. I don't want to take up everybody's time, but the fact that they're approachable. I can get them on the phone. I can get the rep on the phone and talk to them, and they're emailing me back and forth, and we're having these conversations, which I was concerned with a larger group that I wasn't going to be able to do that. That was, I guess, kind of a fourth thing I was looking for as an administrator, but it's been a good relationship. So I'm able to kind of really know those costs well in advance, so I can budget for it accordingly without saying, oh, it might be about this, and either lowball it or highball it. And in this kind of budget process, it wouldn't make sense to do that.
And then the other question is more just a general about the budgeting process. I'm just wondering, you're starting in October to talk about the next year. I'm wondering how often at this time of year or after our budget process is done, you find, something you want for the next year, how often that happens, and then it has to get put off potentially for another year because just
Yeah.
wondering about the process and how you find
and,
that.
And there are, for example, this year it wasn't a major one, but our laminator was one of the issues that we just didn't know coming into the summer, because obviously, in August I find out, well, it's going to cost almost as much to repair this thing as to get a new one, and then that's something I hadn't budgeted for. Now, of course, I try to figure that out, and supplies and materials are a good way to accommodate for that, but with the current environment, I try to actually be it's pretty tight. So it doesn't happen often, and it's, historically, as long as and I've always have, even before we are under the tax cap, kind of look at those costs and try to think ahead as much as possible. Certainly the advantage of being in that building for as long as I have is that I kind of have an idea of exactly what some of the end of the year events cost, even when we're, shutting down the budget and I have to encumber funds. So there haven't been too many of those things, and certainly, I can certainly partner with other offices and things to try to, if there's something we really need. But I think that was an example.
Right.
Not a huge cost item, but it was enough where other things were going to have to be put on hold if we had to go that route, which we weren't.
You don't see that happening too much with like programs or things
I
that you
don't.
might need to bring in.
That's one of the good things about, I can't speak for my colleagues in the middle school, high school, but, for me, it is pretty kind of cut, and we have a very good general understanding of if we're not going with new program or if we are, there's a very clean number that accommodates for consumables year to year. So, and then, like I said, I always try to budget for an open line item per teacher so that they can get what they need over and above what we have for central supply and things like that, so.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
have a
If
question?
the board members, take care of the board members first.
Okay, because I have a couple too.
Do you hear from teachers that they're spending their own money on things?
Oh, yeah, that's, every teacher in this country does it, yep, absolutely.
Do you have a sense of how much?
No, because they just kind of get it done. I can tell you, I live with a teacher. I've been in the industry for 20 years, and I spent the first half of it in the classroom. My wife and I spent upwards of $1,000 a summer on materials. Like $300 isn't going to cover what you need. But luckily here we do have central supply, and there's some other ways, like those little things that you used to. Where I came from, I used to have to buy 3 cases of paper and hold on to them. And if I ran out of paper, I ran out of paper. We don't have to deal with that here, and that's nice. But I can tell you easily a grand a summer before my wife gets into the classroom. They may not spend that much here because my experience, with where she is, they don't have the resources. But yeah, they don't historically tell me, but I just certainly know that that's the nature of the beast in our industry, and it really doesn't matter where you work.
So I've got a couple of questions for you. You mentioned your grade level chairs. What about your specials teachers? What's the process that you go
The
through
same.
with them?
They're represented at the table, and
as a
actually,
grade level.
that's something
That's
new that
new,
was
yeah.
put in
That's
contractually.
new, yeah.
But even before that, they actually
Okay.
did join us. So yeah, it's very similar. That's just a larger group. I actually work usually with them more in their individual budgets, but with the exception of music, everybody else primarily just has one line item for supplies and materials, and usually go from there.
Okay. And typically, how do they bring you? You had a big, year for new programs at Chancellor this year. But typically, how do they bring you their ideas for, listen, I want to do this, but I know that the budget, can't accommodate, so what if we, how many times or during the process do you have these sort of creative brainstorming sessions about how to up the game while not sacrificing or changing what you're already doing?
It's hard to give you a number for that. It's obviously, varies. I think there were probably more of those conversations years ago. Now I think, people kind of understand the process we're going through. So those conversations are a bit less frequent because people are aware that we don't have as many resources, but also there's a lot more of utilizing like PTSO and the RSF and people coming to me saying, hey, I have this idea. How might we fund it? Do you have monies? Certainly we have some, title grants and things like that coming from other offices that could certainly help. And it's usually, my staff knows it's very open conversation. Some people will make appointments with me as a grade and want to talk, about what that might look like or an idea that they have. It's not as if we set up a regular meeting to have those discussions. That's kind of what the faculty meetings are about and the grade level chair meetings are about. And again, I've been there long enough where people know that there doesn't have to be a specific environment where they could bring things like that up. Come to me, fifth grade is big on coming to me with they'll email me and pull me into their grade meetings. Other times it's more individual people. In fact, a conversation now, which I haven't really opened up yet to everyone else, but I've been meeting with fifth grade about how they might want to do their subjects next year, and some version of, I guess, departmentalizing, but everyone holding on to the language arts and things like that, and then working on things they're passionate about. So that's actually an initiative. They came to me knowing if you want to do something like that, we're going to have to talk a lot, and there's a lot of logistics you guys might not realize exist around that conversation. So they brought that to me in late October, and we just had our third meeting last week, and I asked them for kind of a final version so I can start to kind of look at it, and obviously the other people around me know. So it's very organic is the best way to describe it, and I think people know that, as a principal there, I'm open to that conversation, and I'll let you know a few little tentacles you may not know exist as a result, and let's try to kind of get past them. But I don't think people, I think the only reason maybe some of those conversations have been perhaps less, and that's more anecdotal, is primarily because people know that, things are tighter than they, in the last 5 or 6 years. So, but they know the door's always open. So there's a lot of just organic appointments. We want to throw this idea at you. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I would just, on a personal note, encourage you to continue to have those conversations, especially in this process of long-range planning for the district. It's those kinds of creative ideas, and what if we did this instead of this, might surface some interesting.
And right now, we're actually, the big thing we've really been moving about, it started really towards middle of last year, writing. how we teach writing across the grades in my building. Again, Marvin's office has been helpful in trying to kind of use some of the resources we have. We've been having some BOCES people come in and talk about Writers Workshop and trying to create a common language across. And that really came from staff, community kind of reaching out to me saying, hey, we're kind of looking for, we spend so much time on the reading piece. We've spent a lot of times looking at our, curriculum and the integrated units. We'd really like to focus on that one specific thing. So that came out of a lot of different areas, and then we're kind of moving forward with now.
Great.
So.
Can I answer
Do
my
you-
question?
Yes.
No, that's okay. It's your work session, not mine. I wonder if you could share with us any thoughts or discussions that you've had up to this point or anticipate regarding expanding some of the new programs that you implemented this year. You mentioned, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was a great body shop, that's 3, 4, and 5. Is there any thinking about expanding that down to K1 and 2? And if so, what's the thinking at this stage of the game?
So, good question. And 1, 2, and 3 are getting the second step,
Right.
the social emotional. So that's kind of how we split it up, just because we're using the specialist teachers and their time they're delivering direct instruction into the classrooms.
So I'd expand my question about second step, pushing that up into 3, 4, and 5.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, my goal, and we'll kind of have to take a look at it as we're moving forward, ultimately, social emotional learning and the health curriculum are two things that those two programs kind of address and make it very clear and clean as far as a trajectory across my building. Personally, so this is the first year, and we'll kind of take a look at it, and the logistics of it seem to be working well, and I'm glad that there's a consistent kind of social emotional learning happening K1 and 2, and then the same thing for Great Body Shop. Ultimately, what I would love to see, and this is something I have to talk to my staff, and we'll kind of move forward, and certainly we'll do that as the year starts to draw to a close and what we're going to do next year. I personally would like to see the second step program be K-5 in my building. Still utilizing the same staff structure to make that happen, but and have the health curriculum have one of two things occur. We either, and there is a cost to one of these issues. Well, there's a cost to both certainly, but personally have Great Body Shop be either taught in the classrooms as a consistent program that we did years before I got here, actually, I believe, or as we're kind of looking at the next gen standards and figuring out curricularly what we're doing and adding to what we've developed over the years, finding those opportunities to embed that in the integrated curriculum that we could do, because we are going to have to obviously decouple science and things like that, so there may be space for that. And the reason I mention it is because, it could be the other way, but I like the idea of these other instructors in the buildings working with students about social emotional learning in their classroom with their teachers. And I feel like the health stuff is a little bit easier to decouple and embed in our existing curriculum across the grade. And many of it already is, by the way. A lot of it is in our curriculum, but that's what I'd like to see the shift. There's also, at this point, no cost to second step. It's developed by the state. It's a program that many districts are really interested in, and actually Emily Davison and I just talked last week about getting kits for another set of kits for the 6th grades K-5 in my building. Right now, the 3 grades, because we have the kits for 3, 4, 5, those second step kits are actually in the hands of my social worker, Morgan Labruto, and she's utilizing some of those strategies in some of her group work. But that's what I ultimately would like to see. That's just me kind of thinking about moving forward. But I think that's probably a good roadmap, and it's something me and the grade level chairs will start talking about when we get closer to the end of the year as they've seen these programs come through. And certainly it'll be a K-1-2 conversation as far as feedback about how their kids are taking the second step information. But I just feel like that consistency and something kind of, I guess you can consider it a scripted, but something with a really clear scope and sequence K-5 about social emotional learning is an extremely important thing that I think I'd like to really focus on, and then find some of the health stuff that we can incorporate into our curriculum, grade by grade.
Mr. King, may I make a clarifying statement?
Sure.
Regarding the second step is actually provided to us free of charge by the Dutchess County Department of Behavioral and Community Health as part of their preventative mental health series. And so a number of counties across New York State are providing these, but it does come directly from the support of Dutchess County.
Thanks,
Do you have
Brett.
another-
for-
oh,
No, no,
okay.
no.
I have a follow, so,
Sure.
you're talking about embedding that into their day with their regular teacher. Just wondering about if you feel like it would be consistent then, because if you have an outside, a specials area teacher delivering that, everyone is going to be getting the certain amount. If it goes into the classroom teacher, then maybe one class might get it more than others. It may not be as consistent.
I mean, if they follow the scope and sequence of the curriculum, which is primarily a half hour per week.
Okay, so it's
So
structured. in a-
yeah, it's
okay.
structured that way. And right now, and it's a good question also, the part of it, the real estate of the day, taking that out. Right now, the reason it might be something worth talking to my staff about is because it's already being fit into the day or into the week per grade that's doing it. But the good thing, and I think some of the advantage of this is that the classroom teacher doesn't have to take the time to necessarily plan the lesson. They're there. By the way, both these programs are really, lack of a better term, kind of team taught in the room. Like, so the teacher doesn't leave. They're also getting the same information. They're doing it together. I think, the good thing is the real estate's already taken up. We've gotten used to doing that. What's taken off their plate is the time it would take to kind of plan that lesson. But I think it would be consistent. Again, it's short enough and, not something that's to be fitted to every single day that scope and sequence would kind of address that issue.
Anybody else? Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.
John? Yeah, sure.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So I apologize for getting here a little late, and I missed the part of the meeting where we talk about how we're going to conduct the meeting. But is the way that we're anticipating moving forward to basically have every department head talk about his or her development of their part of the budget?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
And what's in it,
What?
special, and things that they want to
Oh,
call
yeah,
out
yeah,
about their budget. Yeah.
Understood, thank you.
On that note, good morning. Talking a little bit about the development process at BMS, for us in the middle school, it's really been a cultural shift. I basically posed to all of my staff across the board to give me their proposals and what their needs are for the following year. When I began here many, many years ago, and I'd say shortly into my time here, there was a sense from individual teachers that they budgeted a certain amount of money and that was the money they had for the year. I've really tried to pull back on that. I've asked them to be as frugal and thoughtful in their budget process and their budget allocations as they can be, but we've really gone back to budget codes that span the grade levels, span the lifelong learning team, and I have them now thinking of it as community money. With that, and I think this speaks to something, Diane, that you brought up, with Brett. Quite often, I have teachers that come to me during the school year saying that they've, discovered a great new novel that they'd like to add to their literature circle choices, or equipment that needs to be repaired, or some new database that they would like to access. And I think in recent years, I've been very, despite some of the fiscal problems we've had, I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to repurpose monies for my own budget to be able to purchase these things and make these opportunities available to teachers. I think now they know that that's going to happen. And so, overall, I think my teachers have learned to do a lot with less. My building budget for next year, my proposed budget for next year, for the middle school is $63,000. A very small number is, I would say $7,700 of that money is after-school programs, extra help, teachers working with at-risk kids. The budget-to-budget increase is about $2,000.
I'm sorry, just wanna, could you tell me, that 77,000?
$7,700.
No, the larger.
63,000.
60,
Yes.
what was it?
63,000.
63,000. That's the discretionary budget, right? Not the budget for the entire school building, including salaries?
No, it doesn't include staff, no.
Okay.
The budget that I'm
That's his,
responsible
yeah.
for.
Okay, okay.
My building budget and what, what teachers in my building are spending,
Okay.
per year.
Thanks.
So where was I? Decreases in my budget, there are a few, you'll see across all of my budget codes. There's slight increases and decreases here and there in materials and supplies, those sorts of expenses. There is a decrease in 7th grade equipment. Last year, we outfitted one of our classrooms with new desks, and we had gotten as far as we could with the old desks. They were beyond repair, and we outfitted a new classroom. So there's a decrease. That was a one-time expense. There was a one-time expense last year for replacing some of our climbing equipment. Again, that doesn't need to be replaced again this year, so there's a significant decrease there. And there's a significant decrease in the 6th grade textbook budget code. And basically, we added a new novel to the 6th grade ELA writing and reading curriculum. Again, a one-time expense, and that's not needed this year. The only significant increase to my budget, and basically was $0 last year and it's $1,400 this year, is equipment repair, and that's to cover the climbing equipment and recertifying the climbing equipment in all 3 buildings. We put it into the middle school budget. It's going to cover the climbing wall at CLS. It's going to cover the high ropes elements in the high school as well as ours. So again, as I say, I think our teachers have done a lot with a little. We've been very fortunate over the years that some of those programs that make BMS uniquely BMS, things like Madagascar Day, working with the improvisation actors in Salem Witch Trials, working with the Shakespearean actors in the spring, our Taking a Stand project, our Embody Art project, several of the field trips that we do have all been funded by outside agencies. We're very fortunate, and my teachers are very good at grant writing. As I believe I reported out to the board in the past, the 7th grade students participate in 4 days of field trips every spring and have done so for the last several years. Those are almost entirely funded through grants, and with a cost of about $8,000. So a number of those programs that we're able to do with the middle school have all been grant funded.
Questions? Yes, Jacqueline?
Are there any of those special kinds of programs that are not grant funded?
No, there are pieces of those programs, and basically, what I tell my staff is, do the very best you can with some of these outside funding agencies, and if you come up short, I will find the money in our building budget somewhere, and I've been able to repurpose funds. But I would say that when that's happened, it's been an insignificant amount of the overall cost of the particular, budget line.
There is some, just like that part of the program is funded by the arts and education. Sometimes through grants, but sometimes through district monies. So that is one area that programs to support those field trips. So I'm trying to remember where you go, Clearwater Sloop or,
Yeah.
but arts and ed may pay for the
Clearwater, Rolano.
program there, while they may get a grant to get the transportation there, but the arts and ed program has picked up some part of the program that the kids are actually going to and attending.
This year, for the first year in many years, we added a 6th grade field trip to the Bronx Zoo. I think at an overall cost of about $2,700, and I think less than $1,000 of that was picked up by the building field trip budget. And that was an addition, and was brought to me after last year's budget process was put in place.
Diane?
So I'm just wondering, how often, or does it happen very often where your staff or yourself, like, there's things that you would want, but the conversation quickly comes to an end because of money, like things you'd want to change or new ideas, is that, not the emergency thing that comes up or small, but like a,
Not often. Again, I think when it comes to big changes, they know that there's a much lengthier process that has to take place in terms of being able to budget for that. I very rarely have I, said to anyone, we can't consider that.
So I'm sort of going to pose this for all of you. Just stay tuned. Given our financial situation, given our long-range planning process, I know you guys have all seen the documents that have been put together by our Citizens Advisory Committee. And I'm wondering how some of those ideas have been bubbling through your conversations. What, if anything, has impacted what you may want to change about what you've presented in your budget for this first draft? What you'd like to explore more, what you think could be possible.
Sure. I know a big focus in our building this year has been social emotional learning. And so, we've implemented a number of things. We've piloted some programs this year. Again, fortunately, we've had the opportunity to use some of our own staff, as well as, work with some outside providers. I know I've spoken to you about Alice Coleman working with our 6th grade students. I think perhaps there's an expense somewhere down the road. Should we work to develop a program that we think we want to either expand or is going to have some cost. The high school and the middle school have been talking about piloting an advisory program next year. Again, goes along with social emotional learning and community building. We've talked about career planning and the potential use of Naviance. So I think there are some crossover between, what's in that document and some of the things that we've been talking about at the district level.
Can you talk a little bit more about the advisory program? What that looks like, feels like in
In
early
very
stages?
broad strokes, I can tell you that the first meeting that we had with a representative group of middle school teachers and high school teachers took place on Thursday. So right now we're identifying goals and objectives. We recognize that there's a lot of research out there that speaks to advisory programs really contributing to a sense of student belonging, developing relationships between students, but more importantly, between staff members and students, giving every student in a building a safe haven and an adult to connect with and a place to go. So we've talked a lot about that. We've talked about what that looks like in our building. It's something that we've been interested in for some time, but having many shared staff and a shared bell schedule have been obstacles for us. And now that the high school and the middle school were working together and we're both on board, we think that we can make this happen next year.
Other questions? Okay, one more. Oh, sorry, one
No,
more
no,
from
go
me.
ahead.
Professional development for your teachers. What do you feel like next year, maybe it's in Marvin's budget, I don't know, programs that you want to push, deeper learning for your staff that you are trying to promote in your budget?
That's hard to say, and I'll say that's hard to say at this particular time because that conversation came up quite a bit with regard to advisory and social emotional learning. So there's going to be a professional, to implement a program and do it the right way, there's going to be a professional development and a training need for staff, and we're exploring that right now. And that's going to be a need because we want to try to pilot this program as close to the beginning of, as close to the beginning of September as we can. There's going to be an immediate need for some of that training first thing in the next school year.
Yes, Joe?
I just make two comments. One, we've had some discussions at our last meeting about calendar for next year. And what John just mentioned is but one compelling reason to tend to front-load our superintendent's conference days so that there is time relatively early in the year to do some things that might need to be done, as opposed to wait until the end of the year. Now you've essentially lost that year. You're looking at pushing it to the following year. So I just want to mention that. The other thing, John said something I was going to mention earlier, and I forgot, but you may notice or have noticed some differences in the way the actual budget document that we reviewed a week ago Tuesday looks. And that is, and some of you are already aware of this, but if you're not, you should be. The state government, New York state government, and as a result of New York State Education Department's ESSA plan, ESSA being a federal program, but each state having to develop their own plan, they both require that that all school districts break out costs by building. And when John mentioned before something about one of the items that you have budgeted, that's going to be
Ropes.
What's that? The
ropes.
ropes
Yeah.
maintenance of the ropes and the climbing equipment. They actually have to be broken out by building. It's a little tricky in a building that has two schools in one building, but that's Tom's headache. So my point is just to let you know that you may notice some things in the first draft budget already that have already been broken out by buildings. So you may see some decreases or zeroed out lines, and then or negatives, and then it all balances out. But it has to be displayed differently because now we're being required to account for money spent differently. The idea behind it is to ensure that like schools in a particular school district are getting the same amount of resources. Of course, that doesn't always apply to school districts that only have one elementary school, one middle school, and one high school, but you know the way our state education department and our state government works, what's good for one's good for everybody, even if it doesn't really apply to everybody. So it's not going to be a comparison between elementary school and middle school, or elementary school and high school, or middle school and high school. In a bigger school district, it would be making sure every elementary school in the district has the same per pupil chunk of money. That having been said, we still have to account for money budgeted and spent by schools. So that's why you'll see some differences, and you'll see that difference in the next budget draft. You'll see that cost split out over all three buildings because they all have a piece of that action. And since this is the first time through, and I know it would be hard for you to believe that we've gotten precious little specific direction on exactly how to do this. We're making it up as we go along, along with every other school district in the state. So there will be some changes, and you will already be seeing some changes, and there will be, at least I'm sure, several others that we haven't picked up on between now and the final budget, and that goes to the voters in May. So just want to put that on your radar. That's all. I don't know if there are any other questions, but thank you, John.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Staring at that chair for the past hour.
Wondering how you were going to get around it.
Now that you've gotten that out of the way.
Workers' comp form or down in the business office.
Similar to Brett and John, in terms of our budget development process in the high school, we get a calendar from a district office. I share that with my department chairs. There are 6 in the high school now. I ask the department chairs to confer with their colleagues in their respective departments and develop requested expenditures for the upcoming school year. Then before, about mid-December, towards the end of December, I'll meet with the department chairs and we'll review their requested expenditures in the event that I don't fully understand or I'm curious in terms of what they're asking for. I must say too, similar to what John and Brett mentioned, our colleagues are very conservative in their requests, understanding the constraints under which our schools have to operate. Always they're focused on supporting instruction and supporting teacher training. That being said, within the high school budget, there are probably 5 areas that have significant expenditures within our building budget. The first is our supplies budget, which for the upcoming school year is $45,135. That amount of money has remained relatively static over the past 5 or 6 years for a couple of reasons. One is that these are supplies and materials that are necessary to deliver instruction in art, physical education, science, and home economics. So you need to have supplies to run programs in those areas. So with the support of my colleagues and the department chairs, we've tried to kind of build a firewall around those monies in order to continue to deliver those programs. The next area of expenditure is textbooks. For our upcoming school year, $44,993. There's an increase in that amount due to our need to replace our physics textbooks. In addition, we need to purchase review books for global and replace our AP European textbooks, which are out of date as well, probably 10 plus years old. In our English department, the department would like to continue to update and revise and refine its offerings by including works representing other voices, other perspectives into our English curriculum, and expanding the canon that they're currently working with. Our next area is library, $17,000. That budget line represents both BMS and RHS, but it resides, it lives in the high school budget. That amount of money has remained static. Again, that's an area that John and I want to build a firewall around over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years. And it includes both paper books, digital resources, and audio books and periodicals. So we've remained that's remained consistent over the past years. A couple more. We have equipment, $10,130. Some increases there. We're going to finish replacing some of our band chairs. We decided with Laura's support to phase that replacement into over 2 years. So next year would allow us to finish that replacement process. The chairs we had before were almost not usable anymore. So now they're going to be replaced next year. In addition, and this isn't final, I've been talking with Mr. Burnell and Mr. Teeter in the PE department would like to maybe add a washer and a dryer to our equipment in order to launder some of the PE materials that need to be laundered after class on a weekly basis. We currently have a washer and dryer in the home ec area. That needs to be either repaired or replaced. And then there's a question about how feasible it is to have those materials laundered across the building. Are we interrupting Ms. Usowitz's class? Is it a distraction? So on and so forth. So there's a little flex in terms of that equipment number. Lastly, field trips, about same $10,000, and that represents restoring basically what our field trip budget had been in previous years. We send our music students, as you know, to Broadway shows. We send them to adjudication festivals. We send our art students to any number of art museums in the area, both downstate and upstate. We are now sending our English students to journalism conferences, creative writing conferences, and things of that nature. So the teachers would like to go back to the funding level that we've had in the past. In terms of the rest of the budget, we're talking about things like credit recovery, repairs and maintenance, another area that we prefer to maintain throughout the years. And other expenses can include things like parking tags, diplomas, diploma covers, scholarship folders, and things of that nature. So, in a nutshell, that's the high school budget in terms of discretionary spending for the upcoming school year requested.
Questions? Steve?
Just with respect to the field trips being added, John had talked about using grant sources for that. Have you looked at kind of some of the organizations that might be able to help fund that?
We have, and they've been very generous in the past. Rhinebeck Science Foundation, the PTSO, and that would certainly be an option next year if those funds were not available in the general fund. So that's always been something that we've tried to take advantage of when appropriate.
You're going to get the biggest hit about long-range planning from me, anyway. So we've talked a lot about adding internship opportunities for students. We've talked a lot about Naviance and, an individual education plan for all. What does that look like in your head for next year? What does that look like financially?
Thank you. Yeah, we've, John and I, because the Naviance program extends, as I recall, from 6-12. I don't think that there's
K-12.
totally, or is it K-12 now? When we had looked at it a couple of years ago, I thought it was 6-12. But we've talked for the past couple of years about adding Naviance to our budget. My recollection is it's $8,000 to start up, and then $4,000 per year after that. And I know it is on a list of potential considerations for this year. In absence of Naviance, what we're currently looking at and currently working on is, and this is part of our guidance plan as well, within College and Careers 1 and 2, part of what Isabel, Ms. Usowitz, has added to the curriculum is the development of a career plan, which is state mandated for all students. And this career plan is currently being developed using Google Docs. So periodically, every 3 or 4 weeks, I'll get a number of invitations to join a Google Doc, which links me to our students' career plans that they fill out in Isabel's class. In addition to my having that link, our guidance counselors get it, Ms. Davison gets that as well. So that's going to both, of course, help us fulfill Commissioner's regulations and state requirements, and it's a step towards personalizing education for our students and helping them develop their own plan and their own goals as they move through our high school. I think Naviance would really streamline that process, but it exists right now, certainly. It can be refined. So in answering the first part of your question, I forgot the second part of your question. Could you repeat that again?
Internships, actually, no, let's
Yeah.
not leave Naviance
Sure.
yet. Can you give us sort of a description of what Naviance can do? What it would provide, how it would benefit
Yeah.
kids?
It really centralizes, in my understanding, a lot of the functions within the career planning and guidance function. So for example, there's personality inventories, interest inventories. There's a way to easily research colleges and universities in a centralized location. There's a great way to research professions and career opportunities with links to both federal government resources and other resources. A lot of questionnaires that allow students to think about what their interests are and what their abilities are and what their strengths are, as well as their areas to improve in those things. So my take is that it's really a centralized way, both for students to access these resources and for guidance counselors, administrators, school psychologists also to have access so that they can provide feedback to students in terms of what they're looking at and what questions they may have.
And how would that benefit our kids in real time? What would you do differently with that information?
Well,
you, the counselor's guidance, you know,
Oh,
the
sure,
team.
Sure. So let's say, take my example, let's say for whatever reason I need to talk with a student. For whatever reason, before I sit down with a student or have them come down, I can pull up their profile on Naviance, and I can see, you know, what are their plans, what are their career plans, what are their own self-assessments of what they'd like to do with their lives. And that's just another area where I can engage with the student and develop a relationship. And you can multiply that or ramify that with any faculty member, certainly a guidance counselor who really knows these things already, but it's a centralized location for them, or any of the teachers, or any of the students' teachers who can do the same thing. So standing here right now, I think it would help us develop an even closer rapport and relationship with our students, and it would enable us to really tailor their educational experience to a greater extent.
Which leads into the internship question. So tell me your thoughts about what it would take, or if it's even possible to develop an internship program for
You know,
kids.
I've talked with Ms. Usowitz and with the guidance counselors about that question. And that would be, again, standing here right now, I would consider that to be a multi-year process to phase in, you know, if we really wanted to take root and be successful. And one of the ways to do that, again, this is just a conversation, would be to perhaps look at moving one of the college and careers classes to the senior year. And that would be a great platform to have students begin to intern or shadow in other professions, both logistically and practically. I think the senior year would make sense because a lot of times students can self-transport. Two, I think in terms of their personal development, they're at a stage where they can really benefit from an internship opportunity. But again, in terms of, and I'm thinking back to when we moved our health curriculum from 11th grade to 9th grade, you really have to plot it out and see, you know, what cohort is going to be doing what when, and sometimes there's some double up in terms of making sure that all students take that required course. But again, just having initial conversations with Ms. Usowitz and our counselors in the high school, a great degree of interest and enthusiasm for exploring that possibility to benefit our students.
And do you see any costs associated with that?
Yeah, there would be. Again, looking at the health transition as we move to health from 11th to 9th grade, if we're thinking about moving a college and careers course from 10th to 12th, or from 11th to 12th, and then 10th to 11th, there would be an additional staffing cost to that in order to deliver the required course to overlapping
During the transition.
During the transition,
yes.
okay.
But that's
But then that would
not
go
be
away.
That would go away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Jacqueline?
Following up on the idea of seniors being able to do internships, would that be during the school day? For part that they
Yeah,
would
and
go during,
again, this is
potentially?
very, very tentative conversation,
Right.
so we haven't even gotten to that point of looking at whether it's during the school day or after the school day. I had been in communication about 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months, with some of my colleagues in Westchester County who have senior internships which take place at the end of the school year. Basically, once AP exams are completed, seniors leave the building entirely and complete an internship, and that's how they conclude their senior year. I don't know how I feel about that, but that's something that other schools do.
Are there liability issues with seniors self-transporting to internships or to other activities during?
Sure, well,
I would think
There could
potentially,
be.
yeah.
I want to make sure we talk about any of those things with our assistant superintendent.
I would think for that reason, if not the other ones, this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is likely not something that's going to start in September.
Correct.
I mean, a lot will need to go into figuring out how all the moving parts might work together. But I know Ed and I talked about the internship concept a couple months ago when we were just talking about it in in the CAC LRP, so he's started to look into it, but unlike Naviance, which if the budget support were available and the board felt that's how we should be spending that money, that's something that could probably start sooner rather than later. The internship, that's going to need a little bit of time to flesh that out. It's much more complicated than plugging in a guidance program.
And to your questions about process in terms of what Tom and Joe asked building administrators to do, if there's a proposal that has a staffing impact, where we're going to have to add FTEs to our staffing, we need to alert our supervisors to that very, very early in the process, because it's a significant budget cost. So if we're going to have to, if we would have to double up on college and careers 1, that's a staffing impact. So we need to let our supervisors know that what we're looking at, wanting to add 0.2 FTEs or 0.4 FTEs, and there's a process in order to add that to the budget. So it's certainly, to Joe's point, it's not part of the discretionary spending that my colleagues and I are talking about today.
Mark?
So just to speak about the Naviance for a moment, it sounds like a very useful tool, and I know a lot of other school districts have it. Doesn't sound like the expense is a terribly high cost. I really would encourage you to try to move in that direction so that, you know, we can benefit our students that could use that.
Also, if I could just piggyback on that comment, yeah, there is a budget impact, but it's my understanding that at least one of the members of our high school guidance staff has experience with Naviance.
Yeah,
So in
yeah.
terms of training, I think we would already be a leg up on the utilities of that piece of software if we were to bring it online whenever, this coming year, the following year, whatever. There would still be some training involved, certainly for our counselors, but one of them has already used it extensively, so I think that would be a pretty seamless, I would anticipate it would be a pretty seamless transition to
Both of our
that.
counselors are very excited about the possibility of using Naviance. It had been included in last year's budget draft. My colleagues and I were tasked with finding significant reductions in our budget drafts last year, and that was removed. You know, if we're looking at the choice between cutting art supplies by $8,000 or removing a wonderful add to our budget, that was our decision. So there's certainly building support, certainly support in our counselor's office to use Naviance. So if I can add $8,000 to my budget right now, I'll be happy to do that.
And another thing to go along with that too is that this is provided through BOCES, so we should get about a 50% return the following year on our aid.
50%?
About
That's a big
50%.
return for
Yeah,
us.
we-
BOCES.
it's
BOCES
depending-
aid.
Yeah.
BOCES aid is never that high.
It depends on what section of BOCES aid you're looking at.
Gotcha.
To look
So
at that section some
certain,
more.
certain things generate no aid, like our capital, BOCES capital expenses. But there are other areas in which we do get refunds of that. But to go along with Naviance, my son just used it, and I really appreciate the program because it helped in his search for colleges. You can kind of fine tune it. You know, I only want to be 200 miles away, and I want to be in engineering, so it's nice along that ways.
So
But
the meeting and the conversations with the counselor start there, rather than the counselor saying, how far do you want, you know, what are you comfortable with? So it gives great data to the counselors to really maximize and optimize the time they have with students.
And right, because it also, you know, if you, it looks at your interest too, and if that school doesn't really have that, it doesn't really show you those kind of results because it's not the right fit. But to go back to Naviance though is, you know, we can get the cost of the program, but are there additional costs? Like, are we going to have a night with the parents to describe this, and is this going to be an every year type of thing? So that's just the cost of the program, but are there other costs associated? Because I know the first year it's like $8,000, because that provides the professional development for them, even though I know we have a person experienced in it, though we do need that profession. So that's why the first year is higher. But are there other expenses that may be associated with the program?
when we
that
went
we'd
to-
have to think about.
Yeah, John and I attended a webinar last year regarding Naviance with our colleagues. And I think a lot of the parent outreach and communication would fit in our already existing structures. We have nights.
Because I know you do have parent nights and
Yeah.
things of that nature. If that fits into that night, then
But you're right,
great.
some of the training for the counselors, we would have to account for as well. But as Joe mentioned, one of our counselors is
Yeah.
well acquainted with Naviance.
Okay, good.
Lisa?
Okay, so I'm not sure this is the right moment to raise this issue.
Sure.
But since we're talking about adds to the budget, and in particular talking about not just sort of one-shot ads, but an ad that would be carrying forward over multiple years into the indefinite future, at the risk of throwing cold water on what I don't have a reason to think is a bad idea, I do want to say that this board has made the long-range planning process a goal for the past couple of years, and there's a committee that has been working very diligently towards developing a recommendation for a plan for the board to consider. I am troubled by the idea that we may be sort of akin to the kid in a candy store who sees all of the delicious candy and wants it because it's so delicious. But then, all the allowance money's gone because he spent all his money in the candy store on the delicious candy. I don't want to push that analogy too far. But my point is that if there are things like Naviance, I'm just picking on it because that's what's been talked about right now. Again, I don't have any reason to object to it per se. And, the overall cost does not sound extraordinary, but of course, the overall cost of many items is not going to seem extraordinary individually. It's the additive effect that's gonna hit us. I think that any item like this, like Naviance, like potentially the BARD Early College program, other things that are just not coming to my mind right now, should be studied and recommendations should be developed around them, at least as part of the long-range planning process. And we as a board should make a determination as to whether those are things that we think we ought to do, independent of, or at least not solely tied to how we budget for them in a particular year. And once we do that, if we decide that, yes, this is something that the district should invest in, then we should develop a plan for how to budget for that. I do not think it is a good idea overall for us to be saying, yes, let's put money in the budget for this item this year. Because then we're going to have this item baked into the budget going forward. It's, we've talked about this as a board before. It's always harder to cut things out once they're in than it is to put them in the first place. So I would encourage my colleagues to think about that, both in terms of this particular ad and also more generally in terms of how and whether to be adding things to the budget for this year. If there are things that have to be added because there is a need for them to be added, that's a different conversation. But if there are things that it would be nice to have, but we don't actually have to have this year, and I think Naviance is a good example for that purpose because we do have an alternative in place. It's not as desirable, it's not as flexible, but it gets the job done for right now. So it's not like if we don't add Naviance, we will not be providing services to our students that we ought to be providing to.
Correct.
That's it. Thank you for letting me use you as the excuse for making that speech.
Diane?
So I hear what you're saying, Lisa. I do agree with you. I mean, I think, you know, when there are items, we have to budget for them. We have to look at them in the long range. But it is also okay to say in your budget, and I'll pick on Naviance too, next year Naviance is risen to the top. It's important. We need to have that. And we'll look at our budget and maybe there's something that's less important and we'll just change it. So I think it's, you know, you still have to have that conversation, and it's still important as a district that we grow and we do everything we can to provide the best education for our students, and that may change year to year and something may come up. But I do want to talk a little bit about candy and then a little bit about no allowance were my original questions. So just for a moment about the internship, you know, we've been excited about that since long-range planning since it came up. So I think it's a great idea, and I do think it will take some planning. I think we're small enough that it'd be great if, you know, we have kids that are currently in 3 study halls that they could do an internship, and some kids that maybe only have time in their second semester that they could do it that, you know, they could be flexible enough to look different for different students, and we could provide that opportunity. I think it's great. I think it could have a long-range impact as far as electives. If kids maybe choose not to take electives and do an internship instead, it may affect those classes. So it's definitely something that has to be looked at, but exciting and something I hope we can provide for our students moving forward. In your budget, so this would be to the loss of allowance, restoring the field trip. I do want to touch on that again. So that's not been something that's been in the budget the last couple of years, and I believe it's for a music field trip that I think they were, that's what the addition is?
There's music field trips.
That's what the addition.
There's also field trips for our art students, and there have been field trips for our ELA students.
Okay, so I'm wondering, besides other funding sources, if some of the classes, you know, they're different students every year, so the field trips are every year. I'm wondering something like in the special areas like chorus or band, if that's like an every other year potentially, because you typically get the same students for 4 years in those programs. I don't know if we're currently funding the band field trip. Maybe they could alternate, or just some way that they were not adding to that line if we just looked at every other alternative to still provide it, but not maybe in a different way.
Well, I want to confer with my colleagues in the music club. Sure, anything's possible, but
It just stuck out as an addition. Yeah. That's it for me.
I mean, just to remind us all of the process, ultimately, we'll bring you a final budget by early to mid-April, and ultimately, the board has to approve or disapprove of that. So this is a good time for those I mean, I'm glad you raised that question, because this is why we do this at this time in the process, so we still have time to discuss various things, various offsets, this for that, or whatever. So that's why we're having this discussion this morning. I appreciate it. I also appreciate Lisa's comment about sustainability. We certainly don't want to implement any kind of program, whether it costs $8,000 or $60,000, unless we're fairly certain we can continue that in the future, especially something like, you know, the discussions we've had about the Bard Early College. That's a huge expense, and the last thing I want to do is get a bunch of kids in that pipeline, and then in year 2 say, well, things are bad this year, we're going to have to not do that. So, I mean, we need to consider sustainability with the entire budget. I mean, I think it's a point well taken, and not necessarily agreeing with the candy store analogy, but
I did say I didn't want to push
but
that.
I know, and I appreciate that. But with sustainability, sure, we need to be conscious of that.
And I would just like to add on that, Lisa, I do appreciate that comment about sustainability as well. In terms of Naviance, my question is, you know, and there is no answer for this right now, but if we had a program such as Naviance, what would it save us in the long run? What I don't even know what it could save us, but it's providing an engine for better information provided to guidance and administrators and counselors. So where would that save us on the back end?
I don't know if I'd characterize it as saving anything, but as gaining.
Well, certainly gaining, but my guess is that because it's a powerful tool, it would provide, I don't know, less paperwork, summer hours, there may be things that it offsets that we wouldn't need in other budget lines. So, I would be interested for that analysis to.
My colleagues in the
Yeah.
county, if they've realized the savings through deploying Naviance.
Well, you have to probably look carefully to find the savings rather than just keeping the line the same, is my point. Like, you could say, well, let's pick on summer hours. We have 20 hours of summer hours for guidance or the aides or whatever. Maybe we only need 10. And what does that equate to dollar-wise? Because the data is already in the system. We don't need to generate forms and paperwork. We just need to hit print, right?
I understand your question.
Okay.
The summer hours for guidance are devoted to scheduling, but I understand
Okay.
your question, and I'll
Okay.
follow up.
Thank you, thank you. Anyone else? Jacqueline?
Two questions, follow-up questions. One, can anybody speak to what the K through 8 application of Naviance is? If it's a K through 12 program? I know you were thinking it was a 6 through 12 program, but can anybody,
Well,
does anybody know?
when John and I attended a webinar, it was a 6 through 12 program.
Yeah.
That was at least last year, if not the year before. My understanding is of the middle school function, I'll ask John to correct me if I'm going straight. It's very similar, if not identical to what the high school function is. That it allows students to explore careers, explore interest inventories, and it's information for the middle school counselor, middle school faculty, really to understand the career paths and the personal attributes of their students.
I think during one of the CAC meetings, I think one of the teachers had said that it could incorporate a lot of the work that CLS is already doing as students move through those grades, some of the information that teachers pass along to the future teachers, and maybe that could carry as a repository towards teachers to go K-12, and that would be a big improvement, I think, on a lot of different avenues, social emotional wellness, strengths, weaknesses, that type of stuff.
Well, I would suggest that since I'm hearing at least some level of interest on the part of some board members, that in the time between now and when we have to finalize the budget, these questions should be answered. So we go forward one way or the other with full knowledge of this particular item. I want to elevate this to the highest or most important consideration we'll have in the whole process, but I don't want to get to mid-April and not have these things nailed down. We should know one way or the other, because I think it may make a difference as to whether we decide to find a way or defer to a later year or whatever, so.
And Tom, just for clarification, the $8,000 startup being BOCES aidable, does that bring that down to $4,000 for startup
No,
costs?
that-
Or it's at 16 and brings it down to 8?
No. The initial first-year cost, with BOCES, you purchase in the current year, you get reimbursed in the following year. So give you an example, so how this would work, you'd put the $8,000 into the budget for next year, we're gonna pay the $8,000 out. The following year,
You get $4,000 in
2021,
BOCES aid.
I'm gonna get $4,000 in BOCES aid,
Right.
okay? But the cost of the program goes down to $4,000. So in the second year, the net effect is zero. Actually, it's
Okay.
really no cost to us.
But it goes out in expense in
But-
this year and comes back in a revenue in the following
Right,
year.
Yeah, no,
but
I
then beyond that, the following years after, the net effect is $2,000,
Okay.
because we'll be paying $4,000 out, but getting $2,000 back. And that's in the
Gotcha.
simplest of terms.
Yeah, perfect,
You
yeah,
know.
simple is good. Thank you. Jacqueline?
I had a second, different follow-up question on the field trips. Was there a cut in field trips over the years, or
Yeah.
were any of those field trips covered by grants in the intervening years when
Well,
the budget wasn't there?
There was a cut in field trips, as I mentioned previously. We were asked to find $50,000 worth of savings in the high school budget last year, and field trips was one of the areas that was reduced,
Sorry,
that I reduced.
I should have clarified. I know there was a cut budget-wise, but did the field trips happen anyway by grant funding, or did they not happen?
Grant funding and fundraising are extra co-curricular activities. We conduct fundraisers. donate those monies to the field trip fund so that the field trips couldn't take place.
So they did still take place?
They did still
They
take
just weren't
place.
in the budget because they were covered by
Correct.
outside fundraising and
Yeah.
grants? Thank you.
Yeah, just to give you some history of this, the field trips have been, at least right now, cut in half of what they were 10 years ago. The field trips, I would think, were probably around 40,000. I think I remember CLS, each grade did 4 trips, and now they do 2.
I was at about $24,000 when I started. It's been as low as 2, and it's back up to about 8. And primarily, just on a side note, that's exactly how we addressed it in my building, but yeah, it's been less. I primarily budget only for transportation most of the time, and granting sources sort of paying for admission.
Before the programs,
But
the
that's also
admissions.
got some of the granting groups don't have as much money to do that. So yeah, I went from 24 to currently 8, down to 2 early on when I really got it.
Right.
But the actual field trips still happen?
No, not to the degree that
And
you,
they've also changed because we've done a lot of curriculum development, so some of the things we used to do shift. So no, not as many, I can tell you that much. And we've got, we've had, we used to go out to naturalists in 2nd grade, and then they were bringing the naturalists to our school, so it was cheaper, stuff like that. But
Yeah.
there's a couple reasons why it shifted, curricular implications and certainly funding.
yeah, because there was a lot of programs that used to go to, some of those programs are coming to you through Putnam Northern, Westchester, BOCES. They do a lot of the education, environmental education. They come to you.
Science stuff, Star Labs, stuff.
So instead of going to Norrie Point, basically try to bring Norrie Point to us. It's less expensive, plus the whole travel time, their day isn't taken up by a lot of travel back and forth for a 2-hour program. 2-hour program, rest of instruction is going on the other sides of the day when they're here too. So there's a lot of, also, depends on the program too.
I should say too that depending upon the cost, typically it's transportation. We'll look in our existing budget to see if there are any transfers that can be made, because, I know my colleagues and I like to say no to a field trip to a worthwhile experience.
Yeah, I've got one more question that is not related to this. Long-term, your enrollment numbers are going to drop in the next year or 2.
323 next year.
Yep. So tell me what that looks like, feels like for your building, what's going to need to shift? What are you planning to accommodate for that? You're not a building of 400 kids anymore. So
Well,
what's
I'll answer
that?
with process. I'll confer with my colleagues, with my department chairs, and ask that very question and solicit their input.
So
we
those
can develop a
conversations
plan.
haven't started yet?
We're in the awareness phase.
Gotcha.
So that's where we are, and I'll solicit input and have a more detailed idea in terms of the plan.
Okay. When do you think you're going to be able to share that plan with us?
When would you like it?
I want you to develop the plan thoroughly. I want to know how long you think that'll take.
Well, I meet with my department chairs on a monthly basis.
Okay.
So
Okay.
mid next year,
Okay.
unless you need it sooner.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Diane?
It's not so much a question, it just, when you're talking about potentially adding a washer and dryer, it just strikes me as something we should be able to get donated potentially from someone. Maybe there's-
You know anybody in the appliance sales?
I don't know, but I feel like, we could, that seems like something that, just a thought.
It's a good thought.
Well, one of the bigger questions is where would it be located? Do we have a water supply? Do we have those type of things?
After
Because
all
they
those
currently
things-
just don't exist.
Well,
so.
he wasn't even sure that he wanted it, but if he does want it
So
and
it's-
there is all that room,
There's some
then
of those type of
maybe
things that gotta
someone
be
would,
worked out.
Right.
give us a washer and dryer.
What's that?
I heard something about the washer and dryer, so is it donation or donation to washer?
That was the
Yeah,
question.
If we decide we need one. No, yes.
We want them to last for the long term.
There you go.
So we don't want your used washer and dryer then?
We don't want anyone in the,
Okay.
just to
No,
clarify.
mine's a workhorse.
Just to clarify.
Christine, you can't donate your washer and dryer,
Community
okay?
members bring us their washer and
Yeah.
dryers. We don't want used ones, no.
Okay. Thank you, Ed.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Would this be an opportune time to take a few minutes for a break?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, we've been at it for a while.
Halfway through.
Take a
Like 5 minutes?
5-minute
Yeah.
recess? Okay,
Thanks.
excellent. Okay.
Let's get
Are
started
we all
here.
back?
Yeah,
that-
let's go. Yep.
I know, I'm
Okay.
whatever. Anyway.
Thank you.
So
All
yes,
right.
I have to stand outside in the cold.
Thanks, everybody.
So we're here longer than I
Who's
do.
up next? Marvin's
Who'd like
collecting his
to-
papers.
who'd like to be?
I think he's running up to the mic.
All right, Marvin.
Don't trip on the chair.
Yeah, it's a little chilly in
Yeah,
here. Sheldon, where's the heat?
This is
Sheldon,
this is the
Sheldon, you're up next, and we're talking about you, so
was about
you
to
might
say
want to
that's
pay
what happened.
attention.
Let's talk
It is
about
the
some
coldest
heat.
room.
How do
In
we
a
heat the
room
building?
with
It's all
two
glass.
of the window walls are, right.
Marvin, if you need to walk back and forth to generate heat, it's fine.
Campfire, yes.
Age, I think the circulation is just good. It used to be.
Some jumping
Come to my
jacks or
office.
something will get you going and be a little warm.
Can I do that? if
Yeah,
it's-
Sure.
You can walk back and forth,
Wiggle and
whatever.
fidget, all that you need.
Yeah, you can.
It's right there on the floor. I figured.
Go ahead.
Dancing,
little
no,
dance.
you don't
Preach
wanna-
it, preach it.
What? Oh, yeah, it's got a
That's
carpet.
everything will go right down the hill if I start dancing. Okay, so hopefully I'll be brief. So I'll just highlight sort of how I go about doing the budget preparations for the curriculum instruction office, and then some things that are in the budget that you should notice. Okay? So generally, how do you describe it? It's sort of like a top-down, bottom-up strategy for building the budget for that office, because why? Well, that office has a lot of deliverables over the course of the year across a broad range of areas. So I have to primarily pay attention to what the federal government is doing through the state education department as it filters down to this local education agency. So I have to look at particularly policy from state ed in terms of curriculum, instruction, assessments, new initiatives, and things like that. So I take a look at all that kind of stuff. I look at all the data that comes in from the testing every year to try to see if there's areas of interest that require our immediate and urgent attention in any kind of budget cycle. So it's that sort of thing. Then what do I do after that is I consult the comprehensive district education plan that we go through a process to develop, and I try to set some sense of priority in my own mind as to what the sort of the collective will as it's expressed in that document as to what's important. I have conversations with the principals. Of course, we have administrative council meetings on a weekly basis, so we're pretty aware of what's going on. I'm also aware of initiatives that are ongoing, and we're going to need to support them into the following year. So I'm kind of aware of that sort of thing. So then I sit down and look at sort of my budget lines and say, well, how can I, respond to all those in the most intelligent way I can, try to be as economical as possible. And that's really what I do. Some things you should be aware of. We do salaries for curriculum development, and that typically is used over the summer for summer curriculum projects to get ready for the following year. But we are also noticing that as projects become available, they kind of come to our attention. We're doing some stuff during the school year outside the school day, but predominantly that work is done in the summer. I added $15,000 to that budget, and the reason I added $15,000 to that budget above cost from last year, so it went from $60,000 to $75,000 in the SY 19-20. And the reasons for that are the following. The state education department is moving out of the awareness phase of the next generation science standards into an implementation phase. So I'm anticipating some movement inside our schools to start to implement the next generation science standards, particularly at the elementary level. We've had some preliminary conversations about what that might look like, and there's a range of possibilities in terms of how we might respond to that expectation. That range from perhaps acquiring a curriculum of some sort or another, or a resource from the outside, or working with our local Dutchess County BOCES to do some kind of bottom-up or some combination thereof. Either way, I think there's a cost driver there in terms of doing some summer work, so I'm anticipating that. We spent this school year spending a lot of time pursuant to the CDEP plan, the state education department, and even the board's goal on school climate and culture issues and social emotional learning. So I'm anticipating there's going to be some summer projects that are going to sort of ramp up in that area too, as well as, like it was previously mentioned in at least a couple of the schools, where it looks like there's going to be some professional development summer work that we're going to need to do, and so I'm kind of anticipating that being a little more than what I've had in the past, so that kind of drives why I sort of upped the cost a little. We're reviewing and revising the guidance plan. There's, we have several teachers, as you know, retired, so our typical pattern with new teachers when they come into the district is to provide them with some summertime to work with colleagues to get ready to start school. So we don't like just starting school cold, so we really like them to get in. That means we've got, you know, a couple of, we try to get the teachers they're going to be working with in with them a little bit at a time, give them some time to do some preparations in terms of curriculum to start. That really accounts for it. I mean, there's a mild cost driver too that I think is worth noting, is that the federal grants, that we use some federal money out of Title I and Title II to pay for our summer work. Those grants have kind of been going down every year, but, you know, I don't know what the rate is. Tom probably knows better than me, but 5%.
About 5%, I would say, yeah.
I'm throwing that number out,
Yeah.
don't hold me to it, but it's somewhere around there. And I anticipate that happening apace. It's just kind of the way it is. There's a new initiative, we don't have to chase this down here, but all the private schools in the state now can access Title I and Title II funds, and so they're now in the mix in terms of that pot of money, so the pot gets smaller as it's dispersed and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of a driver there too, so that's why that's there. I put in an extra $5,000 in consultant expense, so that went from SY 18-19 at $10,000 to 19-20 at $15,000. And really, it's kind of the same reasons, really. Typically, what we do is we try to pair up folks who have some expertise in a particular area and bring them in to work with our staffs. I think you heard the SEL project, Social Emotional Learning. That's going to require us doing some partnering with folks that we worked with over the course of this year. So I could see a potential cost driver on that across science, SEL, possibly technology, and so on and so forth. Superintendent's conference days, of course, that's how we pay consultants to come in and work with our teachers on those days. I also thought it might be wise just to add a little bit, because Steve every year sort of facilitates a tech day in February, and it was pretty tight budgeting this year in terms of getting people in, and it might be possible that we might need some funds there. So I thought it was appropriate to do a mild $5,000 increase in that budget. And then I also increased, general supplies for curriculum from $10,000 to $15,000. That was another $5,000. I did that for the reasons that I just talked about, which is that typically in the run-up to these deployments of new curriculum resources, such as Big Ideas in the elementary school, what we've tried to establish a pattern is I sort of budget and try to anticipate for those big initial increases that we know we're going to have to do a big purchase of some kind or another, and then slowly over time sort of have that get integrated into the building budgets. And so over the years, like the Balanced Literacy Project for buying books for classrooms or supplies and materials or textbooks or whatever, I've tended to try to fund those because I tend to be tied to those new initiatives in one way or another. And I've just noticed over the years that we need a little extra money at a certain time, but then those don't become recurring costs. They just sunset into the building budgets, and then I'm looking for the next new thing, which, as you know, in New York, there's always some new thing coming down the road. So I'm anticipating, again, perhaps some SEL resources and perhaps resources for the next-gen science standards. So that's pretty much what you should highlight. The other stuff in there I try to keep at a minimum. As you know, I'm the Title IX guy and the data guy and all that stuff, so I tend to have to go to a lot of like annual refreshers and workshops and stuff. So some of that travel and conference money I use for that purpose primarily. Back in years ago, I would do some traveling and go to somewhere, but we can't afford that kind of stuff anymore. So it's all backup for the specific jobs that we have to do in our office every year. That's pretty much what that's my budget. It's not, I mean, there's not a lot of lines in it.
Lisa?
So Marvin, I just want to get a little more detail about the areas of increase. And the question's really going to be the same for all of them. What are your numbers based on? Have you researched and come up with a range of what your expected costs would be, or is this, a guesstimate based on prior experience, a combination, other factors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would describe it as an estimate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would describe it as. What I typically do is, like I'll go back and check all the spreadsheets and do a 3-year average. So, okay, so over the last 3 years in summer curriculum, how much aggregate money did we spend? Where did the money come from? So we have general fund, Title I, Title II, and 611. Typically those are the 4 drivers. Once in a while we'll include some grant funds into that from the Science Foundation or something like that. And then I'll just kind of look at them and say, okay, well, how much money did we spend and what did we do that year? And then I just sort of estimate, well, what if I factored in that some of those projects are going to probably not be repeated, right, because we won't do them. And then, but I'm also going to add some more, so what would be the rough estimate of the add, and try to accommodate for the 5% decrease in the grants or whatever it might be. So it's really an estimation kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, with the summer curriculum projects, I like to describe that expenditure of money as sort of like that's an innovation fund, and you should probably think about it that way. That's investment in improving the quality of whatever area it is that we're going to start school with in the fall of 19. So it's an estimate of how I might continue to fund that innovation, really. And that's what it's for.
But I want to make sure I understand. When you're going back and looking at the 3-year average, you're looking at actual expenditures and not budget lines for those 3 prior years. Is that, am I correct
He
about that?
uses his money. You don't have to worry about that. He uses a professional development. He goes right up to it.
Okay,
So
okay.
there's
And-
a little bit of money
Tom,
left
nice way
over,
of
but
saying
he
that I make sure I spend
doesn't
all
he
my
doesn't
money.
expend he doesn't go over it, but he spends it.
Okay. And then related to this on the specifically with respect to the increase in supplies that you were speaking to, is there any redundancy between your supply line and the supply lines for the individual buildings? Maybe overlap is a better way of putting
It's
it.
a good question. I would call it, they're overlapped and they're concurrent.
Mm-hmm.
So there are often years where we run into things during the course of the year that we know we're going to go into.
Mm-hmm.
Last year with the big ideas, math is one. So there's a building budget, we know how much that is, and then we estimate the overall cost. And in that case here, we had to make a decision. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that, but there was a pretty high upfront cost to buy in, but what that did was it set us up over the long term. So then we took money out of my budget line and spent
Okay.
it together. So in that case, you could say it's overlap, you could say it's redundant, but in fact what it is a partnership to collaborate to get a project. That's pretty common actually with these the buildings. Something comes up, they'll say, hey, I want to do X, and then
That's very useful information. I appreciate that because, speaking to what Joe was talking to before about the district's requirement that it now report on a per building basis for expenditure items, it's useful to know, for us to know, how the overall program in that area gets developed and how it gets apportioned out between you and the buildings and other potential people who would be participating in that. So I appreciate that.
It's also a good example of how unspecific our friends in Albany are about exactly how we should chunk this money out and account for it.
Right.
Just to be quite frank, it's pretty fuzzy.
Okay, well, that's good for us to know
Yeah.
too, because we may be expecting a level of
Yeah.
specificity that isn't realistic.
Yeah, I mean, we're all going through this for the first time, so
Okay.
we'll do the best we can with what they're telling us,
Okay.
but what they're telling us isn't always crystal clear,
Okay. Thanks, Joe, and
just
thank
so
you,
you know.
Mark.
Any other questions for Marvin? Jacqueline, I saw your hand first.
Regarding the implementation of next gen science standards, and do you anticipate that we will need to have a curriculum by the, within this next school year? Or, I mean, I guess I'm thinking comparing to like the acquisition of Big Ideas Math, like how long of a process was involved in from the, okay, we're gonna need this, to choosing and purchasing it. So, are we in the researching phase, or, yeah, we're gonna need to actually get something in place, either develop it or buy it in this next school year?
Yeah. I would say we're moving out of the awareness phase into the first stages of implementation. So I think we need to start to take action on implementing. And so we're in conversation about what that might look like in the elementary school. And like I said, there's at least two different strands of thinking currently on that. One is to look at something that comes out of Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES. It's not necessarily the thing that would be the answer, but it's called Science 21, and it's a kit-based implementation of the next gen standards. So that's one way of thinking about it. Another one would be partnering with Dutchess County BOCES with a professional developer down there who's done a lot of work in this area, and she calls them live labs. So we might consider going in that direction. So right now, I'd say the answer to your question is it's somewhat fluid, but we need to converge and start to move. So we're going to start to have conversations about that. We're actually going to try to have the professional developer from BOCES up to sit down with some of our teachers, and Brett and I, and have a conversation about that, start making some judgments. It could be true that then also they might be a replication of the math process where, Mr. King and some teachers convene and start looking at different resources. So it could be a combination of those things. So,
I guess I'm thinking in terms of understanding and appreciating, that you use up your budget every year, right? But if we don't get to the phase of actually developing or purchasing a curriculum, does that mean we're going to need the extra $15,000 the next year as well? And you'll put that money, towards other excellent, I'm sure, purposes of professional development, but or I guess what the outcome goal of this increase would be. Does that make sense?
yeah, no,
Yeah.
it makes total sense. Well, so it's an estimate. So I'm just trying to be transparent about that. I don't know what the actual costs are. That's just a guesstimate based on kind of what I normally see these initial costs are, and just sort of saying, okay, over the years that I've done this kind of work, when you get into this world, kind of how much money do you need sitting ready to make a move? And so that's why that number is there. Will we spend all of that? I don't know the answer to that question. I will say this, we need to start moving in that direction, because the state education department is moving in that direction. It's agreed upon generally that it's the right thing to do. Another additional cost, for example, is that, again, we could get into curriculum weeds here, but we don't need to do that. We wrote the existing units of study in the elementary school such that social studies and science was integrated into the ELA block. With this kind of approach, we're going to need to start to separate that out. So there's another issue that's going to come up in terms of how that's going to get delivered, what kind of materials are going to be available. So again, I'm anticipating some cost associated with that. But if you were to press me and say, well, can you nail that down standing here today? I can't. It's just an estimate.
And I'd like to clarify something. When I said Marvin spends his budget, I was talking about his professional development hours, not his materials and supplies. There's many years where he doesn't touch his materials and supplies. It's really something that comes up in the summer as they're doing the grant writing, not the grant writing, I mean the curriculum writing and things of that nature, and something comes up that, oh, geez, if we could add this, he's got that support, because the principals aren't budgeting for that, because that's something that's coming up after the fact. There's some years where he's not spending the $10,000 or $15,000. This year, because of big math ideas, or big ideas math, that was true. But in many years, he only spends it on true innovation type of things that weren't budgeted by the teachers and by the high school, or by the schools, because they didn't even know this innovation was there yet. So he's really there to pick up, those innovation pieces of that. So he does watch what he doesn't typically spend his material supplies and things of that nature. All of that. That's only when he has to. So I want to clarify
Gets a
that.
gold star.
But the curriculum writing and those things you do for summer work, those monies are used, no doubt about it.
Diane, you had a question?
In fact, excuse me, I'll go one step further and say that pretty much every year we are reviewing the summer curriculum projects and scaling them back when it's appropriate to do so, not just because of money, but, well, this project shouldn't require this many hours, this seems like, so, I mean, that, we go through that process every year. So, yeah, I don't want you to get the idea that we're spending curriculum development money like we're drunk and disorderly. We're
Candy, alcohol.
we're being pretty discriminating about what we approve of the projects that are submitted to us, so that it's appropriate and that the work that needs to get done gets done. And I think we've had a pretty good track record of accomplishing that. And that's all I have to say about that.
And you.
I have two questions, but on that, with the, we get those, the summer curriculum, the summer projects, we get the hours. Is there a formula that goes into those hours? Because they're kind of all over the place, so we look at them and they don't really make sense to us necessarily. Is there a formula, or is it just based on your experience on how long a project should take, or how many hours should go into something?
Okay, so here's how it works. No, there's a process. So here's how it works. Again, it's kind of a top-down, bottom-up thing, because we're heavily reliant on our professional faculty here and have gotten a lot of, very high-quality stuff by listening to them and letting them tell us, based on their own professional development experiences when they go out to conferences or wherever it may be, conversations internally at their departments and grade levels. So, and then that's a combination of also us seeding those conversations by talking about where we think we want to head and what we see the relative strengths and weaknesses might be. So I then send out a letter. This year I sent it out way earlier to all the professional faculty, inviting them, and then I have a design criteria for the application right on that letter. It's about a 5 or a 6 point design criteria that requires that it be aligned with the New York State learning standards for their area, aligned with the goals and objectives in the CDEP plan. It's a whole lineup of things that would be what you would expect it to say. So then we ask for those to be submitted to the principals. The principals review them to make sure it's consistent with what they're expecting. And then once that's done, they sign them, send them over to me. I then review them and try to get them in some kind of shape where I think it's reasonable to say, okay, I'm ready to schedule a meeting with Mr. Phelan, and then we review all of them. So before they ever get to that conversation, hopefully we've sort of weeded out anything that fall into a category of, wow, we're going to have to go back and talk to them anyway, so there's no sense in wasting Mr. Phelan's time. So that's really how it works, and then we review them one more time and say, wait a minute, there's a question about that, go back and fix that, or cut those hours because it's too much. Now, your point about calibrating hours, that's really been a combination of things. I mean, I've been doing and writing curriculum documents for, way too long.
Wow.
Could be the right answer to that. So I have a rough sense of how long it takes to write a document and how much time, effort, and energy should be put into it. So that's part of it. The other one is just sort of local norms, just like, well, how long have we in the past paid other teachers to do that same kind of work? So we try to create some equity there. Is that a perfect process? Probably not, but it's pretty close. And what's really, this is one of my favorite things about this process, is that the teachers always go way above and beyond what we ask them to do. They produce very high quality work in response to this. And so I'm always very happy with that kind of thing. So we always get sort of more than what the hours we allocate, and they're always very good about the fact that we might at times have to say, look, we're going to have to cut your hours back. And as Mr. Phelan said, that's pretty much a normal thing. We try to equate them out and cut them down.
Okay.
That's kind of how that works.
Yep. No, thank you. My other question was, so the increase in the for the curriculum writing for the science standards. So that makes sense. So that's coming out of a budget of curriculum writing. So is that accurate? That when you increase that from, it was, I think, 60,000 to now it's 75?
Yeah, so it's,
So-
I think it's called salary for curriculum development technically.
So I guess I'm wondering, instead of increasing, like, it seems to me that there's curriculum writing that was done this past year that would be done. So why wouldn't this be taken in place of it instead of being an increase? Is that,
No, I totally get it.
Okay.
So I see that as, the answer to that is there's a delta add there, and it's based on the factors that I just talked about. I look at sort of holding constant what I see as things that normally come in, and then I also see some additions that weren't in the process last year, and I see a slight decrease in the federal funds, and in order to kind of get back to where I was, I'm figuring it's gonna cost another 15,000. So that's kind of how I do. I see some moving parts in that and say, okay, it's this. Now, again, I'll be transparent here. Could we make do with what we had last year? Sure. We'll do the best we can with what we have every year. But that's my estimate of what I think to get done, what I'm thinking is gonna come at us this year.
got it. Thank you.
Marvin, has there been any consideration, especially because these are the next-gen science standards? You're making a face.
No, I'm cold.
Oh, okay.
I told you it was gonna get weird. Not dancing, though.
Sheldon's up next, by the
I'm not
way.
facing you. I knew that was gonna happen.
Sheldon has an increase for heat for next year.
Don't make me.
Budget.
What conversations have you considered have had with our Science Foundation, who has a lot of money that they are waiting to spend on you?
Well, I mean, have I had conversations with the liaison in conversations about, hey, you know, this is coming up, we don't know quite yet what that's gonna involve? Yes, of course we have.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And are we prepared to include that in the mix? Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Good.
So for example, professional development, if we saw that we needed a particular kind of professional development and within our normal operating budget, we couldn't do that, or if we thought, wow, we could do this, if we went to them and had them pay for it, then that would allow to free up some local funds, sure, we would do that sort of thing.
I encourage that. Jacqueline?
A follow-up to that, can you refresh my memory of what kinds of coordination you've had with or funding you've had from the Science Foundation in recent years?
Help me understand the question a little
Sorry,
bit. No, don't
I'm freezing too. A little
Okay,
blanket
so-
on that.
I was wondering why you were making faces at me.
What funding has the Science Foundation contributed towards your areas in the past few years?
Professional development, for
Professional
instance.
development, yes.
Yeah, I don't
What
know.
kind of relationship have you had that led to actual funding?
Well, what would be better if I just consulted all of my spreadsheets on how many grants they've given us and what we've allocated all those funds for. It's a lot of money and a lot of projects.
Well, Christine's waving in the background.
She knows.
She's got the answer.
Yeah, like Project Lead the Way, the human body, the engineering, introduction to engineering and technology. There have been summer programs that some of the teachers have gone on with that, and then throughout the year, different projects relating to curriculum. So
It's a lot of money.
they really do a lot.
But he'd need more time to give you
Yeah,
a number, yeah.
You'll be surprised how much.
yeah.
We're talking about rehabbing the lab, we're talking about sending everybody to professional development Project Lead the Way, we're talking about buying all the materials that are in those labs. It's
So you're
tens
already
of
kind of
thousands of
counting
dollars.
in, assuming there's gonna be an ad from Science
Well.
Foundation in some of these places to supplement.
Well, are you or
Or
not?
are you? I guess that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, well, that would fall into the category of, you know, I don't presume that someone's going to say yes or no to a grant proposal, but we would assume that if we were to do a build-out on something that would be within their wheelhouse, we would explore that funding resource. Just like we did with the Project Lead the Way build-out, for
Yeah.
example.
But we're not counting on that money.
Yeah, I mean, you can't.
No, you can't.
Which is why this $15,000
Yeah.
is here.
Laura,
Yes, Lisa.
just, on this subject, and Marvin, please correct me if my understanding's wrong, but I've always thought that the granting entities that we've been lucky enough to have in this district, the Science Foundation, the PTSO, in particular, that those are not intended to take the place of funding that comes from the school district's own resources for items that we are required to provide. So if the state is mandating a change in curriculum for science, and we have to provide professional development to allow our staff to teach that, we can't say, oh, we'll just write a grant to the a grant application to the Science Foundation for them to fund 50% of that cost. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I'd say that the supplant relationship between the district and the Rhinebeck Science Foundation is a little fluid. The reason is there are often things that we would like to fund out of our general fund budget that we just simply don't have the money for.
Mm-hmm.
Rehab an entire lab and put Project Lead the Way in the middle school. That would be something
Right.
I think people could rally around and support in a general fund budget.
Mhm.
It's simply not the money.
Mhm.
So they're supplementing, but they're actually doing that which the district would otherwise might do, but you just don't have the money.
Right, but not
So-
for things that were mandated to do.
But, so mandated expenditures such as, I don't know what, curriculum build-outs, might be some overlap there too. They might support professional development in some particular area that might connect to that. So there's overlap there too.
But if we have a mandate, we better make sure we have the money in our budget to address the mandate.
Okay.
So hence that's why
Yeah.
I budget independently of what I can anticipate the Science Foundation. It's not like I put them in a budget line and say, well, I'm pretty sure I can get 50,000 from the Science Foundation next year, so I'll budget accordingly. It's kind of the reverse.
Okay.
I kind of sit down. We have a liaison meeting once a month, so I'm sitting there talking to their liaison and saying, here, this is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? And then she'll kind of say, yeah, you know what? That looks like something we might fund. And so, okay, so I keep that in the back of my mind.
Okay.
And also I think this is probably a gray area, like we might be required to implement the standards, but we're not necessarily required to have our teachers write the curriculum for it. That would be what that's
Right,
a step
right, that would
above.
be a
So
decision we would
So maybe
make.
you could get funding for that part of it, because that's not really, we're not,
I
we're
think-
choosing to do
Maybe.
that.
What I'm hearing is there is not a strict dark line between paying for what we're mandated to do and paying for what we want to do over and above, that it
Yeah.
kind of bleeds over depending on
Right.
the situation. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's warmer here. Can I stay here?
Yes.
You're going to have to share the microphone with Sheldon, who's about to tell.
Mr. Teeter's going to bring some body heat up your way, so I would just make everybody aware of the time.
Yes.
I can stay as late as you guys want, but let's just be mindful of the time. We have Mr. Teeter and Mr. Jensen and Ms. Davison to speak with you, and I thought we'd try to shoehorn 10 minutes or so in for Mr. Burnell before we adjourn. So I just
Okay.
remind you of what's on our agenda for today.
Thank you.
Sheldon,
Okay, my budget's pretty simple.
that's a good thing.
Well, no, it's like if things break, we fix them. I make sure we have soap and paper towels and cleaning supplies.
Heat?
Heat, always like to save energy by keeping the temperature. As far as
We're
like,
not students,
my
we don't
budget's
get
pretty
heat.
flat.
This is the gentleman standing in front of us with a vest on.
Yeah, exactly. And a sweatshirt. And
I can't help you guys so much.
In fairness, we're not kids, so,
So, just in my line items, there's one big item that we had a decrease in the energy performance contract. That was an 18-year performance contract that has expired, and that included a service contract for the digital controls for the HVAC and also for the boiler cleaning at both schools, which was pretty expensive. So that was a $56,000 decrease. But in order to get the stuff that was done during the service contract, I had to put that back into my other budget item, which is my repairs and maintenance, which is up almost $40,000. So that's for the boiler cleaning, servicing the digital controls if we have a problem. It's not like a service contract where they come in every month, like they used to, but if I have a problem, I would call them in. Really, everything else is pretty flat. But I did want to bring something up to you guys, how we would handle in the future is like I'm going to need a new dump truck down the road, which is like a $60,000 expense. And I don't think I'm going to get a $60,000 one-year budget increase, or I'm not sure how we're going to handle that. Plus, I have 3 pickup trucks that are going to have to be replaced down the road. They're still fine right now. The dump truck's going to be my first concern, and then the pickup trucks over the next couple of years, I've got 30,000 apiece.
So do you have a suggestion? Well, actually, let me ask a different question. What's your timeline for each of those items before you would actually have to replace them?
We put a new bed on it last year, the year before. I'm going to run it until the frame breaks or stops running. So it could be 2 or 3 years.
So 3's your outside estimate?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about for the other trucks?
The other trucks, the oldest is a 2008, and it's in good shape. But I have a 2008, 2011, 2012, so we're all very close in age. So there's 2 different ways you can look at this. We've never done this in the past, but it's maybe start trading in a truck and trying to get when it still has value, or start to try to spread them out, or they're all going to come kind of like it's going to be all going to be replaced pretty much close to each other, which would be like $90,000 over a few-year period.
Right.
But I would say I'm hoping to get another 4 or 5 years out of them.
Okay.
One of the things I've been thinking about is you do see it quite often in a lot of propositions, a bond anticipation note, but typically to purchase buses. So you can borrow the money and then pay it off over 5 years. And that would be kind of a situation we may be thinking about as a separate proposition to the community to purchase the vehicles, but to do it over a 5-year period where we borrow the money up front, but then over 5 years pay that off as a possibility to help spread it out, as opposed to be like get a 60,000, it's 100,000. Let's spread it out over 5 years, and then you're looking at 20,000 a year versus a 60 and a 30 and a 30. That type of a thing.
But that's not a budget issue for this year.
Not for this year.
No, it's not at all for this year's budget.
That sounds like an interesting concept, Tom. My concern is that if you're getting all new vehicles in a year, then they're all going to die.
Yes, I agree with the same thing. I mean, there's a little bit of difference here, as a dump truck probably has a different life cycle than a pickup, I would hope. That the dump truck at 60,000 is
have
going
a lot of miles on them. They never
No, I know,
they
it's not that,
just
it's just,
wear out,
it's
rust out.
20 years and it's starting to wear out. It's not like it's got 100,000 miles on them, that's not the case. It's
that's
just,
a 2005, I believe.
so it's just something just to put on your radar as to what we may need to look at in the future as looking at a ban. And the thing possibly with the ban too is we could probably offset when we actually purchase the vehicles themselves. Borrow the money, but not specifically go out and purchase it exactly at that time. We could probably stagger the purchases a little bit to help. But we'll have to come up with a plan.
Can those, like districts that have buses, then they do a proposition for buses, can that be done like through a proposition?
Yes,
to-
yes,
That's what we're
So
saying.
that's-
You
that
could do
would
it
be
that
done.
way, yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
what,
the issue is that you could have a budget pass, but that proposition fail.
yeah.
Or it could go the opposite way too, where the proposition passes and the budget passes.
They both could just pass.
Well, yeah, that's what we want, both of them.
Okay.
Any other questions for Shelley?
Jacqueline?
So I apologize if this was covered in the meeting that I missed, but in the operational plant, the custodial salaries, there was an increase there. Could you
You're gonna have to answer
Well,
this.
or
I-
did I just read that?
All right, just to let you know that at this time last year, actually, no negotiation group, no bargaining unit actually had a salary last year. So in the case of this one, it happens to be 2 years' worth of increases. And there was a year going back, I don't know exactly how many years, that you hired all these custodians at one time, and so they're all hitting longevity steps this year too. So it's 2 years of increases plus
Longevity.
about half of staff getting longevity increases this year.
And the overtime increase, which is the next line, is due to the capital project starting up this summer.
Correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And yes, we did discuss this last time, but we're happy to bring you up to speed on that.
Any other questions for Sheldon? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheldon. Who's next? I have a coin in my pocket. Okay,
We'll save the best for last.
all right.
If I
It's some
remember
pressure, Steve.
No, wait a second.
Better be a song and dance at the end or
I
something.
thought the last person was me.
Oh, that's true.
Ah, there you
You might want to pull it down a little bit. Just, yeah, that's good.
Great.
That's good.
So, the process for budget planning for the Office of Special Services begins actually at this time in preparation for the following year, because at this time of the year, I'm having annual reviews. I'm learning about students' progress and areas of need, and I'm projecting out even further than just September. I'm thinking long into the students' future, their career, what they need in order to prepare for college and careers, and if that is sustainable within our current district programming, if we need to be thinking long-term about programming, or if we need to be thinking long-term about reaching out to outside resources. So, that being said, while it starts much earlier than one might expect, I'm not able to give Mr. Burnell hard numbers until well beyond the conclusion of the budget process, because we're at the place of annual reviews where we're having conversations and planning specifically for next year for individual students. So in November and December, I speak with my teachers, and I look at the programs my students are in, and I start to project. But my projections are very, very, very conservative. And so I'm not able to be as specific with numbers and needs as I would like to. And there's no way to move that process in any way, because we want to have opportunity for students to grow and to learn, so that when we come to annual reviews to prepare for the following year, we're able to have the most up-to-date and accurate information to prepare appropriately. That being said, I do have the fortunate situation of also having 2 title grants that I can draw upon and use and plan for utilizing as I get closer to May and June for the upcoming year. So in November and December, I have conversations with my teachers about things that they may feel that our program needs for the following year. I work on budgeting those into the budget, and then also fold those into our grants. Unfortunately, those grants are also earmarked for other preschool as well as private school expenditures that I cannot touch at this point. In terms of staffing, you'll see that there is a decrease in our high school staffing line, as we are saying goodbye to 3 excellent educators and looking forward to bring on new staff in that area. In terms of our programs and tuition for students with special needs, you will see an increase, as there are at times unexpected placements that we need to be able to provide for students that cost the district additional funds. At this time, what I can say about outside placements is that while working with Mr. King and Ms. Locks in K through 5, we've done an excellent job of welcoming students with a variety of different needs and planning carefully and planning creatively to create self-contained programs as needed. Some of our larger districts are able, and neighboring districts in Dutchess County are able to sustain self-contained programs in each grade level across K through 12. We're not as fortunate here because we are small, So we have to be more flexible, and our teachers in K through 5 and actually K through 12 do that. So throughout the years, we may have self-contained classes in the middle school and high school. They may be multi-grade classes, and other years we may not. So that flexibility in our staffing to have the opportunity to create those programming allows for us to meet our students' needs within the district, within the least restrictive environment. All of the other materials lines are at this point, again, because if there are needs for our in-district programs, I absorb as much of that as possible in our grants. Such as, for example, last year when we purchased the math curriculum K through 5, we wanted to make sure our special education teachers had the necessary materials. We absorbed the extra $4,000 to $5,000 expense of that within that grant. Any questions?
Diane?
Not specifically about budgeting, because your budget, it's such a mystery to me still. It's so complicated and ever-changing. But I do have a question. So you have 3 staff members that are leaving. Do you anticipate replacing them at the same levels, or do you think with declining enrollment you think there's a change there?
So with there is declining enrollment, but there's not declining enrollment in the world of special education at this point, and the needs for the student that our students have are so diverse. And so we offer a variety of programming, including resource room, as well as integrated co-teaching services and self-contained classes. And I expect that we're going to need that same variety as we move forward. Mm-hmm. I think the other opportunity that we have with our 3 teachers, we're able to have our. Traditionally, we've had 2 of the teachers specialize in 9th and 10th grade to help bridge that gap and to consult and collaborate with their general ed colleagues, so that we're streamlining the delivery of services for students, which is extremely key in a successful transition.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a quick question as to whether you're seeing, like Marvin mentioned earlier, whether your grants are declining in
I would say they're being
size.
absorbed in other areas too. For example, there are private schools now that for whom students are parentally placed, but are also identified as students with special needs that we now have to allocate resources to. So yes, it does seem to be a challenge for us. Mm-hmm. That being said, we do rely heavily on those grants to assume some costs that sometimes can be unexpected in the world of special education.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emily.
That's it.
Boy, that
Yeah.
was easy,
Anybody
right?
else?
Well, then may I speak a little bit about the
Absolutely.
Naviance piece?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the other, I can't believe that I actually am offering more information.
Neither can I, Emily, but go right ahead.
I'll try to be brief. So working with the PPS staff on the K through 12 guidance plan has been a significant undertaking as they're working within their buildings every day to meet student needs. That being said, the addition of some of the requirements by New York State, such as access to a school counselor in K through 5 and core curriculum in K through 5 in the area of school counseling, are pressures that are going to be placed on our system. Fortunately, Mr. King has welcomed a second step and brought second step and Great Body Shop into the elementary school, and we expect that when we do a crosswalk, we will find a lot of what needs to be taught already being taught by our faculty and our staff, which is fantastic. That being said, we still need to address the college and career readiness aspect of the school counselor guidelines. And Naviance K through 5 would allow for us to do that. 2 years ago, I worked with a group of special education teachers and teaching assistants to read Neurodiversity Within the Classroom. And that book led to a conversation about meeting students' needs in an individualized way, not just students with special needs, but across the board. And we looked, after that, one of our takeaways was looking at what New York State had to offer, which is a K through 12 career plan, which Dr. Davenport referred to earlier. We had the opportunity to take that K through 5, the K through 5 versions, we modified them a bit, and we piloted gaining some information and working individually with students in preparation for IEP development. Now this is a trend across, not just across Dutchess County, but also across New York State to have student-driven IEPs, and this is one of our small and local measures to do so. Having Naviance as a tool to help broaden this effort would not only support the K through 12 guidance plan, but also the delivery of service to students with special needs in K through 5. In the middle school, Ms. Fountain is going to be charged with not just meeting individually with 7th and 8th graders, but next year she also has to include 6th graders in that. So individually, annually, with every student to build upon to help them understand their learning, their desires, and how those two pieces can connect to future goals and aspirations. Using Naviance to be able to prepare for those conversations, having a class-wide activity for students to be able to complete those interest inventories could allow for much richer and much more targeted and sometimes faster conversations to allow her to move more quickly through some of that process, but not lose sight of the goal, which is individualized counseling and support. And then in 9 through 12, while Dr. Davenport spoke about the career plan being available through Google Docs, which is fantastic and a huge step forward, and I commend the support and his leadership in that initiative. That is essential for students with special needs, not just students across, not just the, it's not just a mandate. In our annual reviews, we refer to those career plans every year. We're required to by state ed. It's part of our regulations. And when I first came to Rhinebeck 3 years ago, there was corrective action that I had to take because that part of the students' IEPs were not developed as well as they should have been. I brought in a lot of resources in terms of paper questionnaires that the special education teachers have used over the last few years, and they've used well, but it is cumbersome, and it doesn't allow for as much of the collaboration and the sharing of shared understanding of student needs, strengths, and interests that Naviance would provide. So I would encourage the board to consider Naviance not just as an opportunity to support what's currently in place, but to enhance and to assist our PPS staff, special education teachers, and general education teachers in meeting all students' needs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was very useful, actually.
Before Steve gets started, I would just like to ask that in an upcoming board meeting, the board gets a full presentation on Naviance K-12, so that we really understand what we're talking
Yep.
about here. Thank you. Hi, Steve.
Good morning. Technology, I wanted to discuss a little bit about the budget and what process we go through to adopt that and the components of it. And I'll start with the components first. There are 5 components essentially to the technology budget. The first one is being the lease, which is usually done through BOCES. It's probably one of my biggest items on there. What that lease does is provides equipment and materials for the classroom, but also what's behind the curtain, so to speak. It's the switches, the hubs, the routers, all that infrastructure that goes behind the scenes that you don't see is also covered in those costs. And usually they're 3-year leases, and Tom, you help me with the exact number. We were working on that this week, but it runs 120 to 130 a year or so.
Yeah, I mean, we budget up to 165,000, but
Right.
getting it right is very difficult, so we don't want to.
Changing of interest rates and
Changing of interest rates.
fees and- yeah.
So what particularly happens, because these are 3-year leases, we may be purchasing $120,000 worth of equipment, but in fact, it really is going to cost about $150,000 due to interest and a 3-year period of paying that off. But remember, when we do it through the BOCES, we do get BOCES aid back on it too, so.
Yeah, it ends up being cost effective.
And what we're finding though is the interest rates going out for the leases are getting more, are going up, so we're getting less return on that value, where a couple years ago, we were going out, and the borrowing ends up going out of Long Island BOCES, but you're getting less than 1% before, so just when you wanted to borrow $125,000, you were basically almost getting $125,000 worth of it. But that's changing now when it's now getting up to 2-3%, in the twos now.
Yes,
So
exactly.
you get less for your money.
And the other fluctuation in that particular line is the percentage that I spend on the back end of things versus what you see in the classroom. I usually try to do an 80-20. 80% you see in the classroom, it's directly affecting kids and improving instruction, and 20% behind the scenes. Some years that may change depending on what's aging behind the scenes or what's aging in the classroom. So, but I do try to spend a little bit of money on both sides of the ledger, so to speak, so that we can balance that out. And there are years where we just do nothing in the classroom, or we do nothing behind in our closets and in our infrastructure. So we try to balance that out as best we can. The next line I have is just strictly a general budget equipment line, and that is about $15,000. And that is used for emergencies primarily, and or innovation and field testing some things that we might have in the pipeline. For instance, if there was something completely broke down, completely fried out let's say in a closet or something, we'd be able to replace that and have the monies to do that without it, adversely impacting any other part of the budget within the district. Some things that we've done before as well is we also use it for innovation, which might be, for instance, we are looking at interactive TVs to replace our aging projector systems that we have within our classrooms. So I went out and purchased one TV, and we've been passing that around through the high school from one teacher to another to see whether this is the technology that we want to go with going forward. Another thing is, I think I mentioned this at the last board meeting that I spoke, a virtual reality experiment that we're working on right now to see whether that is something that's going to be applicable to our high school and our middle school going forward in the various emerging technologies. So that equipment line, many times I don't use a lot of it. Sometimes I use half of it. It varies, but it's built as a buffer into the budget to be able to do some of those things and try to be as conservative as we can be with that. Another area the third area that I have is software. And that's an area that is always under constant review. I know that Ed had mentioned earlier about the library software and some of the budget line that he has for library. Our librarian, Diane Unbroker, she goes through that every year, and she does a really a commendable job on doing the analytics and looking at whether a particular piece of software is being utilized properly or underutilized. And we do that across the board, but I just use her as an example. She'll come to me and say, Steve, I don't think we're using XYZ software to its fullest extent. Let's try something else, or maybe I can find a different resource that the kids would respond to in a better way or would find more useful. So sometimes when we do that, we will drop a product and bring on a different product, and hopefully we would increase utilization doing that. There have been instances, several years ago, we had a software program that was at the elementary school that was underutilized, and we just had to eliminate it entirely simply because it just wasn't being used. So we do that every year, and we try to make sure that we keep that budget line as effective as possible, and not just always, because we've always bought it, we've always had it, and the teachers understand it, because many times what I'll do is I'll notify teachers and say, hey, it looks like this program isn't being used, to its fullest extent. What say ye? And we have a conversation, either at a grade level meeting or a department meeting or whatever, and we work all those details out. So there's always some fluctuation in the software budget, but really now, as most of the software has become subscription based. We're Office 365, we're Adobe Cloud, we work on some of these other things. A lot of things have standardized. It used to be back, and maybe some of you remember the Oregon Trail or some of these software packages. It's no longer really packages that you buy. You're really buying ongoing subscriptions. And obviously that's a piece of that is marketing, of course, but it's also forces us as educators to go, is this really effective? Is this an effective use of our money? And we move forward from there. The fourth area is materials and supplies. That's toner cartridges, inkjet cartridges, the generic things that you need, headphones for children at the elementary school. Those kinds of things are always pulled out of there. And then we also have maintenance and contracts, which is the fifth area. And that is some of our switches and some of our electronics require service contracts, especially our essential components that we have within our closets and our networks. For instance, last year, I think it was in the spring, we had a switch completely die. So a whole segment of the high school, middle school was out because the switch that supplied the network connectivity was gone. Within 24 hours, that switch was back, a new switch was delivered and back in service. And that's what those contracts provided with, is a quick response. We actually beat them to that. One of our technicians, he went in and was able to spread out the let's say there's 24 ports on that switch, was able to move those to other switches that had extra ports on them, because we do have some spare ports on all our switches. When we actually did the Wi-Fi system and when we did the major upgrade, I had asked for a 20% buffer within those systems, so he was able to switch that out. So we were actually up within a couple of hours, but the switch came in within 24. But that's the kind of response that we want. We don't want it down. We don't want it down long. Teachers get frustrated with it, and I certainly understand that. And so we want to make sure that we provide a good service for all involved with that. I don't have a professional development budget, but what I do have is we have a superintendent's day usually in February that we in-service all staff, and just give you an example of this year. I met with every grade level, every grade level at the middle school, as well as every department at the high school, and asked the teachers what they wanted to do for that particular day. And the response I got back gives me a good reflection of where they're at technologically and where they see the needs. And what I want to say, and it's not really a budget-related matter, but what I would say is that out of this past superintendent's conference day, 50% of the time, 50% of the staff, just on average, and that's not an exact number, chose to go deeper, do a deep dive into what technology they already have. In other words, they weren't looking for something new. Some do, and that's appropriate. But about 50% said we are gaining, and to me, and maybe it's how the lens I'm looking at is they are gaining confidence in their knowledge and capacity in utilizing technology, rather than just show me something new. I want to take what I already know and really make it more efficient and really integrate into the classroom, which of course is one of your goals, is technology integration. And I see that as a real sign of maturity among the staff, that they're able to go in and say, yeah, we want to work together as the third grade group and want to work on X project, whatever it happens to be, and they wanted to spend the day doing that. So it's self-directed. It was self-motivated. It was, all these things I see are a sign of encouragement as far as technology integration is concerned. So the areas of needs going forward that I see are some things that are logistical, and that is, I mentioned them, the aging projectors, the presentation systems within our classrooms. Just about every classroom has a smart board of some sort or projector of some sort, and those were put in many years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but I think it's coming up to 10 if I'm believe so. So long before I got here. So those things need to be replaced, and we need to have a conversation about that, and that's why we brought in a presenter at this last superintendent's conference day demonstrating the interactive TVs, and then we also have some areas that we are looking at to upgrade, and it's hard to believe, but some of our STEM lab in our middle school or downstairs here, it's been there a few years, and it's not so much the equipment in there is obsolete. What it is that the software and the sophistication of the software wants a faster processor to run them. So we have good machines, and what we have is a plan to redeploy those machines elsewhere within the building, and then replacing those areas that require a high-end machine, which is usually your STEM, your music, your graphic arts, yeah, those areas, AV. So those are the areas that really require some of the more later and greater technologies, but we still have good machines and good material, good equipment that we can redeploy elsewhere. We do have still quite a number of machines at the secondary level that need to be replaced soon. So what we began to do is look at two areas at the secondary. One is the STEM lab, which I mentioned, and the other is the high school lab, which has not been replaced or touched in a while. We are holding off on doing anything with the high school lab because of the asbestos abatement project that is being delayed 1 year for that particular area. So I had planned earlier this year that would be one of the areas of focus, but because that is happening the following summer, we're going to delay that. So there's still some moving parts in all of this. What I look for in developing a budget is a little bit of my observations and my experience in integrating technology. And what I will do is bring those essential needs that forward to whatever group. For instance, in this case, and I'll just use this year as an example, I know that we need to replace some things on the back end, behind the scenes. There's some infrastructure pieces that need to be replaced. One of them is our SANS, that is related to our virtual server, and another project of the upgrade between our closets. We have a multi-mode fiber that goes between the closets. There's some constraints and restrictions on that. We want to replace that with a single mode fiber. So those are two projects that I know need to be done. And then what I do is I've been meeting so far this year with the staff of the STEM lab that's being used in the basement, or the people who use the teachers that use the high school computer lab. So I meet with those people and I target this particular year, I will target that group of people to say, let's talk about technology in these particular areas and begin to address those. I'm not having a conversation right now, but next year, we're coming in, it's hard to believe, but we're coming full cycle now. It's almost been 5 years now since we began putting technology in. I'm going to be circling back towards the elementary school. And then I'll begin the conversations with that group of people again and look at where we're going to improve technology. So the group that I work with isn't always the same group all the time. It's not like the traditional technology advisory committee. I kind of target and I kind of work through the district and work with those particular teachers as the technology. Nothing's worse than talking about technology and say, oh, by the way, it's going to be 2 or 3 years out before we ever get to you, but we want to talk about this. We want to, make it somewhat current. Yeah. So we're doing that. And just and backtracking, I should have mentioned this when we were talking about the infrastructure part of the shop, is that this year Tom and I have been working with E-Rate Central and working on. We are eligible for 50% back. So whatever we spend on the infrastructure side, we are applying for a 50% reimbursement back from E-Rate on that. Now I'll take that money and then we'll be able to reinvest that into technology. We don't have a timeline on that yet because the projects have to be completed and then we don't know how long it takes for that to come back. So I don't want to jump the gun and talk about those monies with teachers until we know that we have that in place or we have a timeline that we can do. And work with them on that. Looking forward, there's a couple things that I'm paying attention to. One is obviously ESSA and the standards, and particularly in college and career readiness. And you've been briefed on that on a couple of occasions. But one of the things that they talk about in there is certifications that students can walk out of school. In the area of technology. Say I'll use Cisco networking certification. I'll just use that as an example. One of the questions that has not been clarified, at least to me so far, is does the state have to pre-approve those certificate programs, or is it we approve them as a local entity to say, yes, we accept this as a certificate that could be eligible for a student? I wouldn't want a student to go through an entire Cisco network program and then not have the state recognize that as a legitimate for credit. So we want to make sure, and that's one of the things that we're just waiting for clarification on, because there are a lot of different certification programs out there that I don't know whether they apply or not, and we're just waiting back for an answer on those things, and that may impact what we do. There are some programs right now that we have access to, but I don't want to necessarily launch those until I know that they're applicable. The other thing we're looking at is increasing the awareness of Adobe Cloud. That's a software program that is InDesign, Photoshop, Premiere, Adobe Premiere. Some of these major programs, we have bought a subscription base because we couldn't use the old version anymore that we've had for several years. And the subscription base is given to every student 8 through 12, and every teacher 9 through 12. There are some middle school teachers that have that certification or that a subscription as well. What that does is very much like an Office 365 subscription where they can use it at home. They have their own personal account, can be used remotely. Powerful programs, not applicable for every topic, every subject, but even a basic understanding of some of those programs is an essential part, I think, for students to have at least an experience with that and moving forward. So building the capacity among the staff to be able to use that and to use it effectively is one of the things that we're looking at this year. I mentioned a little bit about the virtual reality as one of the things. Just want to give you an example here of what I did. We just set it up in near the AV lab, the virtual reality machine with the head goggles. It's an Oculus Rift. And on Wednesday, in a span of probably 15 or 20 minutes, I was floating through the body as a blood cell, as a white corpuscle or whatever, and I'm walking, and it's explaining to me everything that I'm floating. So as I'm coursing through the body, I'm seeing white blood cells, red blood cells, and all the particular parts. What I didn't understand was all the complexity, that there's a lot more in there than just those two components. There's hundreds of components in there, and the complexity of the human body is amazing. And I'm going through in a 360 environment doing that. Now, I'm a visual learner, so this works with me. And so I did that. And then 2 minutes later, I decided I wanted to go to Mount Rushmore. So I went on to another program, and there I am. I'm taking a virtual field trip. In another section, I was taking a DNA strand, and I'm literally rotating it and looking at it in a three-dimensional space. And I'm taking, I took a math program and I drew a circle running from me and away from me, and then I took my other controller and I ran it and intersected, and there were math computations that were going through on this chart, that's a little virtual chart that's on the side. It's amazing stuff that's happening in the world, but it's not a replacement for education. It is a tool to be used, a supplemental tool. And as I mentioned the last time I spoke with you about this, I'm working with a gentleman in Ohio who's done this as a research, or they actually have an entire class on this at the high school level. So it's an emerging technology, but again, it's something that we're just experimenting with at this point. It's at its infancy. I think it's in infancy in the industry, but for certain individuals, it's an amazing technology to experience. And if you ever want to have a tour of that, I will certainly be glad to put a pair of goggles on you and have some fun with that. And,
You may have a line of
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell. I mean, technology is constantly changing, and I can't tell you. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what's going to happen in the future, but I can tell you that what's out there now and what we can provide for our students. I think we're doing a good job of being able to provide that which the students should be experiencing, and that's what education's about, is giving them the experiences so that they can make decisions about their future interests and what they want to do moving forward. So I don't know if there's any questions, but that's really in a nutshell. It's budgetary wise, it's kind of a simple budget, but it has a lot of ramifications on the educational side.
Diane?
I'm just wondering if that's, is that new, or are you getting equipment and letting the teachers try it out first?
Yeah,
That seems like a
it's
great
computer,
way
it's
to.
a set of one pair, one goggle, one set of goggles, and the computer, and we've set it up. I just set it up last week. It's been in my office for a few weeks because I was trying it out, and I want to make sure I understood it. And now I've just I've let some of the teachers know at the high school level that it's coming, and that they're actually, we had some elementary teachers look at it about 2 weeks ago in my room, and it was an exciting experience.
Because in the past, you've kind of asked them what they wanted, but this to be able to try it out.
Try this out. Yeah, and
is
that's
great.
part of what that $18,000 allows me to do. Is I don't want to take and spend a significant portion, but I was able to spend a few thousand on the computer and the goggles and do that way.
Would any of these companies just loan us or let us borrow some of their equipment before? Is
Yeah,
that,
so
is that
far,
something
yeah.
they're moving forward to? Because then we wouldn't have to
it'd be
spend
something.
anything.
Again, I don't want to go down that unless we found the hunger that was there and the applicability curricular-wise.
Any other questions? Steve?
So the smart bond money, have we used all of our funding for that?
We haven't used a dollar yet.
Oh, that's a thorn in my side. You have no idea.
Sorry.
No.
Well, you're about to.
Thanks for bringing it up, though, we appreciate that.
What we did was, we ended up going and applying for an amendment to our original proposal for the line between the two buildings, the dark fiber. That amendment, I think, was completed early fall, and they just had a meeting last week, and it didn't get approved, not because they just hadn't gotten to it. The queue is so long in the approval process, so we're just waiting for that approval. We did complete, though, we had to work on, in order to get E-rate back on that project, we had to go out for bids, and we did receive back 2 bids, one being an underground solution, one being an above ground solution. And so once but what we put to Smart Schools Bond was the higher number, which is the underground solution, because obviously it's excavation and those kinds of things. So but we can't pull the trigger on either one until we get the approval, and then we'll proceed from there.
Right. Is that something that's hampering the effectiveness of technology at CLS, that gateway?
Yeah,
is
there's
still-
I think as more and more people use, for instance, the new math program, and the more that they go online with it, we will begin to feel that pain, because some people will see, because we only have a 100 meg connection. So if I get 30 kids wanting to use it, and it's using a high bandwidth, amount of bandwidth, then yes, you will feel it. So we're on a race, basically, because as the teachers begin to use that program more and more effectively, they're going to go more and more online to do that, which will then cause a greater burden on the connection. And right now, we currently spend well over $1,000 a month for that 100 meg connection, and if we get this in, the cost, once that happens, it goes to almost nothing. So we're really hoping that this will get done. We're basically in a foot race, to be honest with you.
Anyone else? No? Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the interest of time, what I wanted Tom to do for us is just repeat some information that we looked at our last board meeting regarding the first draft budget. I really don't see a reason to go into the detail that you all have, that's online, that's on those tables, but just to remind us where we're at in terms of the tax levy limit number, without going through the whole formula.
Yep. No, we're not gonna do
Unless
that.
you want us to go
I'm just gonna hit
through the whole
We're
formula.
just going to hit the big factors,
Okay.
how we came up with our tax levy for this year. Our tax base growth factor this year was 0.89%, which is still a very, very good number. That's probably one of the best things the school district in this tax cap era is that the town is still building out, and that is helpful where a lot of schools like Poughkeepsie are getting nothing because there's no place to build. The allowable growth factor of the CPI this year was capped at 2, so right there between the 2 and the 0.89 gives us 2.89 basically. But then there is a computation that gets into the capital expenditures. We have some capital debt service coming off, but we added $250,000 to this budget to ramp up to our implementation of the $12 million project. So in the end, our tax levy increase to go out with just the simple majority is 3.4%. It's almost $980,000 of a tax increase, so about 3.4% to stay under the tax levy limit. So in addition to that, we had our first draft about a week and a half ago. A second draft budget will be coming out on Tuesday and will be presented to you. There are going to be some changes to it, not tremendous, but we'll be a lot closer. If you remember it, at the end of last time, we were approximately had a delta of about 130,000. Going through this process, we found some more. I want to say found some more monies, but we've identified some things which we'll talk to in detail on Tuesday. But on the revenue side, some major increases or helping us out is our interest and earnings. through the help of Christine Natoli, and getting better interest rates, we've been able to increase that from a budget of $30,000 to $100,000. So that was an additional $70,000, and we hope over the next year or so that we can see that rate increase even more to be able to provide definitely an offset to the overall budget. When it comes to state aid in particular, of course, we don't have any final numbers, but the state aid run showed an increase of slightly more than $12,000. Don't look at it as, it's not a huge increase, but remember, we're taking off some debt service here, so our building aid has gone down. As a major part of that decrease is building aid went down, is because we're not paying the building aid out. So we dropped about $130,000 off on the building aid side, but we probably lost half of that on the building aid side, so it's a positive though. So, but once again, hopefully before the end of the process and we finalize things, maybe hopefully we'll see some additional revenues on that side. But when we finished up at the end of at the end of the first budget, our delta, this is a shortfall. This is not an overage, so this is a shortfall of just under $129,000.
To get to the tax levy cap.
To get to the tax levy cap. When the second draft comes out next week, we're going to be a lot closer to the tax levy cap. I don't have perfect numbers yet. I'll be working on it over the weekend. But you'll see a number that's very close or potentially even be low. I can't say. We got health insurance rates in and some other factors that we'll talk about in more detail on Tuesday.
So we're going in the right direction.
It's going in the right direction, and no doubt about it. Unless Emily has some I don't know about
It's always
yet.
you. It's always you.
Because you're the only budget that isn't final yet. Basically, everybody's final. Little pressure, I know. But that does influence what goes on over the next month. Potentially, as her CSE meetings finish up, though they won't all be complete. So even then, when we get to the end of this budget process, just know that there are still factors going on that affect this budget. Not only some of the current kids, but also students who may move into our district. There is some safeguards in our budget for that, but sometimes it's not enough, and you just don't know. Some years we don't need any of those safeguards. In some years I wish I had 3 times as much safeguard, and I think this is an appropriate safeguard of 3 unknown placements.
I'd also just remind the board again, especially for our newer board members, that the budget that that you adopt, that we bring to our voters in May, is an amount of money, not a specific expenditure or expenditures or where those expenditures are. It's amount of money. We show our taxpayers in good faith where we anticipate the expenditures are going to be, but we are not constrained by the budget vote. We're just constrained not to exceed that amount of money that we budget for. So just so everybody understands exactly what we're bringing forward to our voters. And we have about a month or so to finalize this. So I think we're looking, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel a little better than maybe we have the last couple of years. So there'll be more information on Tuesday night and in the succeeding couple of meetings after that. So just so you all know, not to preempt anything, but I do want to take just a moment to thank our administrators for A, being here, for B, providing us with the information that I think the board was looking for this year. Also to thank Christine for being here. God only knows why she'd want to give up her Saturday morning, but I do appreciate that. And also to thank Whitney for, and Sheldon's crew for getting this all set up and making all the arrangements and whatnot. It can't happen without you guys, because otherwise I'd have been here at 6:30 this morning. So I'll turn it back over to Laura.
I would just like to ask if anybody has any comments that they'd like to share. You two in the back, I'm looking at you. Okay. If nobody else has anything, I think we can.
Let's adjourn.
Yeah, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.